Center conference room. The proceedings of the meeting are recorded and posted on the Provo City website, provo.org. Please be aware that the microphones on the table pick up the noise of paper and other items populating the table. I invite Deputy Mayor Norman to commence the roll call.
Deputy Mayor Corey Norman. Gary Garrett.
Gary Winterton.
Dave Sewell.
Stephen Hales.
Jim Santiago.
Al Miller.
Brian Jones.
Matt Taylor.
Louise Jorgensen.
Thank you very much. We are delighted to welcome Cindy Rowe, Executive Office Assistant at the Provo City Library. I'm consented to join us today to offer the opening prayer and then to speak about her role in the city. Following Ms. Rowe's remarks, we'll invite Karen Topping, the newest member of our Provo Municipal Council staff, to introduce herself. Ms. Rowe.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to live in this beautiful country and to live in the city of Provo. Father, we're thankful for the city government here and for our state and United States government also. Please bless at this time those who are in charge here of making decisions for the city, that they will have their minds clearly opened and to be able to feel and know what they can do to help the citizens of Provo and the businesses here. Please bless that this meeting will go smoothly, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right, you want me just to introduce myself then?
Yes, please.
Okay, so you heard my name is Cindy Rowe. I work at Provo City Library as the executive assistant. Gene Nelson is the director there, and I am his assistant. So first of all, I do what he tells me to do. And he's a great boss. I really enjoy working for him. I do all the finances for the library, and that's probably the great thing there because I love to do math. So that's really fun. And then I do all the personnel, paperwork and files for all the personnel. And there's other things too, but those are probably my biggest things I do at the library.
We must underrate what you do, given the kinetic nature of the director of the library. There needs to be someone sort of grounded it and seeing things through.
Yep.
We appreciate you in that role.
Thank you.
Very much. It's a superb operation there. Do you come from a library background?
I do not. In fact, it's kind of funny when all the librarians are talking about what they should do and stuff, they turn to me and ask me, now as a citizen, does that make sense to you? And a lot of the times I'll say, I have no idea what you're talking about. So no, I don't. I come from office manager and executive assistants in the past. I was the office manager of an insurance company. I had started to get my teaching degree, and I was teaching disabled children and behavior disorders and autistic and other behavior disorders, K through 4th grade. And then when I moved back here to Utah County, then I decided I didn't want to pursue that anymore. And so I went back into the office work.
There are questions or comments?
I'm just curious, and this may not be a question that you can answer, but with all the emphasis, I know there's a lot of bookstores that struggle and challenges. What's our library doing as far as visitors? Are we really increasing? Are we holding our own, or where are we at? You know?
We were doing a huge increase for when the economy crashed. We just climbed and climbed and climbed, and we have pretty much plateaued out. And we're very comfortable with that. I think continue to climb would have stressed us with our budget out. But now where we've plateaued at a really high area, we're very comfortable with that. So that's So we are very comfortable with where we're at. And I think the bookstores are doing better now too, because the economy's come back up and people are buying books, so that's good.
These online, the Amazons and buying books to go, we still need the libraries though. And I just wondered how people buy so many opportunities to purchase books online rather than rent them.
Yeah, I think renting is a huge a benefit, especially for families with children, because they can get tons of books and their kids read them and return them, and they get tons of books and return them. And then there's people like me who I don't want tons of books at home, but I love to read. So to me, it's great to be able to get any book I want and not worry about the cost or the storage or anything. And I only like to read a book once, so for me, reading a book once and returning it is perfect, and watching a movie once and returning it is perfect. So there's probably 2 or 3 more people like me that don't want to store it all. I don't know.
Well, thank you very kindly.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
We very much appreciate your joining us, Mayor. Well, Mr. Van Buren is here as well. I call for a motion to approve the minutes of the Provo Council, Provo District School Board meeting, joint meeting held on August 21st, 2014.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Garrett, thank you very much. All in favor? Thank you. And the vote is unanimous in the affirmative.
Mr. Miller, we were going to hear from Karen also.
That's what we're going to do right now. I wanted to give her just a little more time.
Great.
These times that I forgot. Please. Karen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Karen Tapahi. Last name is Navajo, so most people get it wrong originally. And have lived in Provo most of my adult life, and I am here as the community relations coordinator. Just started last week, and excited. This is my first meeting. So nice to see all the faces here today.
I welcome you on behalf of all to your new role in the city. Are there questions? Miss Tapahi.
Yes, you got it.
Wow. Syllable accent.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious, just how has the office been reorganized? So what new responsibilities have you taken on, and what responsibilities do the other staff members do?
Louise Jorgensen was coordinating the neighborhood program previously, and now she's moved into more of an executive assistant role, and she's helping me learn the neighborhood programs, and been meeting with some of the neighborhood chairs already, and so I'll be taking that on, and then communications for the council as well. So you'll all get to know me really well.
2 easy topics.
Yeah.
Could you share one of your ideas, or a couple of your ideas that you have for using social media and helping the council in that respect?
Well, social media is such an interesting environment. You really have to be more personal. So one of the things that I've definitely got to work on is being able to share with the public what our council is like, show a more personal side. Mayor Curtis has been a great inspiration to me, even in my past jobs, with being able to get out there and be around the people of Provo and show some of his personality, his wonderful sock collection and everything. So things like that, where we can have people get to know each of the council members and this office in general, so they know what to expect from us. The other thing is social media kind of is short attention span in a lot of ways, and so it actually gives us some great opportunities to get information out in little bits and maybe in a more understandable way. Being able to share it regularly in small amounts, and then connecting people to the more detailed information that you can find online in the blog or on the city's website. It's just such a great way to connect people and kind of get to the people who only want a little bit of information for now, and the people who do want to click through and get the bigger picture and go into more detail. So we'll have a lot of fun projects to work on.
Yes, you will.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we turn to a gentleman who, if his family name were to be pronounced phonetically in the same way as Patahi's is, it would be Uonomo or Uonomo.
Either way, I've heard most of them, so.
But in fact, it's Mike Panomo, who is the executive director of downtown Provo, here as per quarterly assignment or invitation to report.
I have a little bit of a head cold, so if you need me to repeat anything, I'm more than happy to, but I also really love the deep voice. I never had one before. I get excited and I get colds, so. So I just want to, let's see, how am I working this, Bryce? On.
Corey.
Sir.
Well, there's our logo. If I can get this to work.
Right again.
Okay. There we go. Okay, awesome. So I just put together a few slides just to go over all of our benchmarks and just cover them, just kind of just so you can get a really good idea of where we're at. So dollars raised, and keep in mind, this will be for the year 2014, but most of these numbers come from starting in the second quarter. So we've really, and where we're a two-person team, we've really had to take on a lot of responsibilities and work really hard to get where we're at right now. So dollars raised for our memberships, we're at about $60,000. And then trade services, we're at $10,000. Our accounts receivable, we have about $13,000, and we have about $5,200 that are pending memberships, where we're still waiting to hear back if they would like to be Downtown Provo members. And so that puts us right at about $88,000 in total value that we've raised since second quarter of this year. So we're really happy about that. We feel like that was a pretty big milestone. Obviously, we need to get to our 100 mark by the end of the year, but I think we'll be able to do that fairly easily.
Mike, can you give a couple of examples of trade services?
Yeah, absolutely. One that has helped us out quite a bit is our app. So we had our app developed by England Communications, which he would charge a consumer about $5,000 for the work, where he just did it for free for us. Another big relationship that we have is with Coca-Cola, and we recently teamed up with them, and they've taken over a lot of our day-to-day costs with printing material, design work, and things like that, where we don't have to hire out a graphic designer or pay for the printing. They're going to take that on, and in return we list them as a sponsor of ours, and then we work with them on all of our events, and they're really willing to help us on that aspect as well. So things like that. And our trade services with Coke alone is actually really, this is really moderate and conservative compared to what they've actually done for us, but keep it in perspective. So, but they've been great. They've helped us out quite a bit. But we do things like that. There's another, and I didn't list it on here yet. We're working with a gentleman that will be doing a really big sort of introductory video to Downtown Provo and Provo, what it has to offer for consumers. This will be something that the convention center can use in attracting shows there. We will like to play it in the airport on their screens in there. So that production level, he estimated he would charge anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000, and he's willing to do most of that for us for free. And along with that comes all of his promotions. He's actually very very well known in the YouTube world. So I'm very dedicated to Provo, and we've teamed up with him as well. And we're sort of waiting on me to get a couple of things done before we start that filming, and I'll go over those here in a minute. But those are some of the things, trade services, that we would like them to be members of ours, and they give us work, sort of in-kind donation work. Any other questions on the money aspect here?
Mike, you may answer this later, but renewals, what's our percentage of renewal that we're getting from last year to this year, and how are we also total value year to date this year compared to last year?
Yeah, we are about 90%, and a lot of that, so our CRM system beforehand was Excel, and so there's a lot of work going into making sure that bills are sent on time, invoices sent on time, but our rate of return is basically 90%.
90% of what it was last year.
Returning members from last year.
So renewals to downtown Provo are 90% of what they were.
That's right. Yep.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. We're about 90%. There's a few. There's different circumstances where businesses may be moving or going out of business. On very rare occasions, do I meet with someone who was a member that does not want to be a member while still being here in Provo. So for the most part, everyone who has been a member has renewed.
And our total value year to date this year compared to last year?
I don't have that exact number. I know that in-kind trade services was about $20,000 last year, and so actual cash raised last year was $80,000, and so our cash right now is at 60, with our accounts receivable at 13,000, and with our 5,000 pending memberships, if we pull that in, we're actually we're about to match that number for the entire year last year.
So the 60,000 does not include the city's contributions?
That's right, it does not include that. Yeah, it would be much higher with the city's contribution.
This is just a report on the benchmark.
Right.
Right. So we basically at 50,000, that was the city's contribution for this year so far. Any other questions here? So here we have each bullet mark, each bullet point is basically the benchmark with the update bolded afterwards. So we talked about the implementation of fiscal enhancement initiatives, what we are doing, and we're really excited because our lights actually got delivered last Thursday, and it's been kind of a long time in the making. But we'll be hanging our string lighting. It's so the lights are very similar to the shops at Riverwoods. If you've seen their lighting that hangs over the street, we'll be doing that out here in downtown across our sidewalks, which will be from the lamp post. We'll bracket them to the building, then go back to the lamp post to draw the power. And the last thing that we are working on now is permission from the property owners, and we have only a couple of those left to go, but that's really going to change the appeal of downtown Provo, the walkability. They're LED white frosted bulbs, so they'll last a really long time. Downtown Provo Inc. will be in charge of the maintenance and upkeep on those lights, so we'll make sure that the bulb goes out or breaks, we'll be replacing them. And those will be done in the month of September. So we're trying to figure out if we can get any help in those installations, but we're still sourcing how to actually hang them. So, but we'll have that done by October. We're really excited about that. Development and promotion of a marketable downtown master plan. We don't have a master plan yet, but some of the things that we've been involved with in getting that ready is the City Center Task Force, Temple initiatives with the release, and then new developments that have been going on downtown. So we're very heavily involved with all of those, which will give us a better footing in making that master plan. No vacancies on Center Street. We got a little more ingrained in it once when Dave Oka left, just because there was someone needed to take over that responsibility, and so we got really involved with that. And so it was a really good opportunity for us. We met with a lot of the property owners and basically just made introductions to people wanting to start businesses or bring businesses downtown. So we'd act sort of as a middleman, just as an introductee, introducing them, not brokering it, but just as an introduction, and that's been going well. I've had a few new businesses come in here recently that are more retail based, which is what downtown needs, is more retail outlets, and so we've been excited about that. Next on the list is our to survey businesses. I planned on doing this in December at the end of the year, so I'll present on that at the next presentation. Documentation of 100,000 visitors to downtown Provo. I'll show you that here on the next slide. And then continued efforts to downtown businesses and property owners for advocacy. This is really what I spend most of my time doing, is being that business advocate and talking to them about the help that they need, what's going on with their business, and how we can help them, and meeting with all the businesses that are in downtown. That's actually the fun part for me. I really like that, and it seems to help out the businesses quite a bit. So that takes up a lot of our time, but that's one that we really like doing, and I feel like we have a really good impact with it. So we'll go back to the 100,000 visitors. This is a list of our events, and these are some of the ones that are in parentheses that you see here. Those are what we're estimating, or that we had estimated, and some of them haven't happened yet. So a lot of them are fall based. But with everything that we have done to this point, with our summer cinemas, First Fridays, Force for Good, and our farmers markets and things like that, we're sitting at about 80%. So we've had about 80,000 visitors that come downtown, and this is we're going to pass 100,000 very easily this year. We have a couple of events that are planned here within the next month or two that will bring tens of thousands down here. So it'll be really interesting. That'll be really fun. And these right here, the plan plug and the Guinness scavenger hunt, I'll go over those here towards the end of the presentation. I can go in a little more detail there. So, is there any questions on these? Yeah, go ahead.
The Play Street Provo looks like you were estimating 5,000 and 7,000 in upcoming.
So we already did this. Play Street Provo, this is the one that we originally had planned for Center Street, and then we moved it to First South, and we're hoping to get 5,000 people, and we had 7,000 in attendance.
So that was a successful.
It was really good. Next year, I've talked to the businesses about how many people we did have down here, and they are okay with doing it on Center Street next year. That's 7,000 people walking right in front of their stores that I really wish we could have had this year, but there's a little bit of hesitation in closing the street. So next year we'll be able to bring it, and we'll be able to, now that we've done it once, that was a first time event. Now that we've done it once, we know a lot more of what we can expect, and be able to present that to the business owners. After we went over these numbers at one of our Lincoln lunches, and for the most part they were all maybe regretting a little bit that we didn't have it on Center Street, but next year we'll expect at least 7,000 next year. We'll be able to market it faster and better than we did this year.
And First Fridays includes rooftop, right?
Yes, First Friday, that is the rooftop, and this has been the biggest year by far with rooftop concerts.
Just to give you kudos for the Play Street Provo, my family ended up staying hours longer than I thought we would.
Great. Thank you.
The puppies for rent caused me some real grief. So just
That's not fair, is it?
I'll be hesitating to invite them back next year because I couldn't get my wife away from there.
I know my kids either, so that was fun.
Great. Well, I'm glad you were able to make it. So that really was a fun event. I think the most popular part of it was the fire station brought out their fire truck and sprayed all the kids for about a half hour. It was really fun to watch. I thought it was really fun. I didn't get very wet, but it was really fun to watch the kids running around and kicking soccer balls through a fire hose. It was really fun.
I've noticed we close a lot of the streets for a lot of races, and I don't see any race events listed here. Do you guys promote during those things?
So Guru's Dance Nights, those usually start out as a race and then end up in a dance. So the Electra Dash, that's when First East was closed, or sorry, on Center Street, starting at going from Center
University to First.
Yeah, University to First, and so that was all closed in the downtown area. And there's a couple businesses over there that weren't too happy about it. It brought 2,500 people downtown, but that was later at night. And so there's a little bit of, we're trying to figure out how best to handle those when we do close the street for races that we're involved with.
I hear a lot of complaints about traffic patterns, and so I understand that, and I don't hear about the good things, and so I want to hear about some good things that are
Yeah,
happening.
well,
while we're closing.
specifically with those races, we get 2,500 people that are downtown, and they're usually younger college students that see what's going on down here. And that's where you get your return customers. You get people coming back to Provo because they're not generally coming here, but once they've seen it and they see what we're doing and what's here, they like to come back. And so it's sort of a sacrifice of one night, and it's usually later when most business is done to bring people back here on a consistent basis, and that's why we do those.
Gary, are you asking about Provo City Marathon, Provo City
Those
Half
events,
Marathon?
yes, and I wonder what we're doing, if you guys are participating with those. And
So we participated a little bit, but more as sponsors rather than actually planning them. So we haven't been on the planning committee of like the Utah Valley Marathon that came down through Provo. We were sponsors of it, but as far as the planning committee, we weren't on the committee.
I just think it's an opportunity to take advantages, because there are a lot of people that come for that. And
Yeah,
just
I agree.
participate.
And so, yeah, with that specifically, what we did is we actually built an ad for their packet that they hand out to each racer registrant during right before the race when they have to come and register, get their number. We were in there in the magazine promoting our app and what Downtown Provo Inc. does, and then as well as what happens downtown. And then I went as a guest speaker, sort of to talk about Downtown Provo Inc. and what we do and what's available here once the race was over. So we do like to make sure that we capitalize on those events.
In many cases, those events are actually owned by private companies that then solicit sponsorship as
That's
per
right.
Downtown Provo.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that you show as a revenue.
Right.
And Mike, these are only things then that you have helped to plan.
That's right.
So other events like that 24th of July race,
Mm-hmm.
those are not counted just because you didn't have involvement.
That's right. Yep. These are only events that we have a hand in planning or some sort of involvement. Any other questions here? On then. These are our marketing benchmarks. We're doing a good job on this. We've had to change a lot of our messaging, but we're wanting to improve our website traffic to 3,000 per month. We're at 1,700 right now. That will go up here. Well, I'll talk about it here. That's going to help. Increasing our Facebook likes to 4,000 with improving impressions to 50%. And we started out, I believe, at 2,500 or 2,600, and we're at 3,200 right now. Instagram was not one of our benchmarks, but I wanted to add it in here because that's where a lot of the marketing trend has sort of changed lately, where a lot of people are going to Instagram for information. And Kenesha has been doing a great job with promoting on Instagram. We went from, just since March, the end of March, we went from 290 Instagram followers to over 1,400, almost 1,500 followers on Instagram. So that's been really good, and we'll continue to build those as we do our events. We encourage people to go and hashtag and like Downtown Provo Inc. and find us after events so they can find pictures of themselves and pictures of the events. And so we get a lot of followers that way. The app, I had mentioned this, Inkling Communications had built our app, and we launched that May 15th, and we're looking to get 5,000 downloads, and right now we're at 1,537. So we just barely started, just this last month with radio ads and KSL banner ads, things like that, to start promoting this app. And this app's full of business listings. It has links to all of their social medias. There's a place for advertising and coupons, discounts, promotions, things like that. So Anyone looking for a good deal in downtown Provo can go to this app and find out what's going on downtown, find those discounts and promos, and so it's a really interactive app that really helps consumers come back here more often. So we're at 1537 there.
Mike, is there any way, or are you, in fact, targeting BYU student population
Yes.
now that they're back?
Yes, and that's just recent because school is out. And so so we launched it a little bit late. We were hoping to get it done sooner. Technology though sometimes doesn't cooperate with your timelines. So we now that school is back in, we will be doing targeted marketing at both campuses, UVU and BYU.
What's the app called?
Downtown Provo.
Downtown Provo?
Mm-hmm. So next, update the current downtown restaurant brochure. We are doing that right now. I was really hoping to get those designs done so I could show what those are, and they're about halfway done. And so I didn't want to present it halfway completed. But the restaurant brochures are being redesigned right now, and we thought it would be a good idea to have an entertainment and retail brochure as well. So we're going to be building that, which doesn't show you necessarily where the restaurants are, but shows you what you can do downtown on any given night. So we have a big New Skin convention come in with a lot of people. They're looking for what to do. Not only can they find where to eat, but they can also see what to do, what there is going on here. So those will be completed by the end of this week. We'll be able to put those in where we've had restaurant brochures in the past. Continued marketing ventures for downtown Provo by radio ads, direct mail, UVU and BYU campus ads, which is kind of what we talked about. This is what we had just started this, so I would say we're behind on this aspect, but catching up. Online, we've done a good job social media wise, but as far as advertising, we're just getting into the radio and into the banner ads on the internet and things like that. So we'll start to see an increase there. And this will help with our visitors to our website too, up there in the first bullet. So we'll have these ads that are online basically directed to our website where it shows them more information about the app or downloading the app or what's going on that night. So things like that. Any questions here on our marketing? Yep.
Have you worked with Google, coordinating some things? I don't know enough about this, but search engine optimization, it seems like everybody's Googling something.
Yes.
And they ought to be able to, I wonder if there's any strings pulled that we can get ourselves a little bit higher in the rankings.
And we can actually manage that from our back end with how our website's designed. Your SEO is basically just a keyword search, and so how our website is designed is on it's on a Wix.com, so we basically create all of our content, and so on the back end we can put in any of those keywords that we want, so that we pop up with anything that's relevant. So we can do pay-per-click ads, but we'll do those on more targeted events like the scavenger hunt that's coming up. We can do a pay-per-click that focuses on anyone typing in scavenger hunt, and for downtown Provo Inc. would come up in their search bar, but things like that. But yeah, we can actually manage that ourselves with how our website's designed. Any other questions? So these were the new benchmarks that we had put in. Parking, this has been fun. And I say that sarcastically. Parking is an issue that I deal with on a daily basis, probably, and my saving grace has been the Wayfind project. And last I heard, and Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think fall at the end of this year, sometime we're hoping for.
Actually, March of this year they'll be in.
March of this year.
You're never wrong.
I'm going to keep saying that until they show up.
It's very subtle.
So, I'm really excited for the Wayfind project. I think that's going to help quite a bit with not only our consumers being able to see that there is parking here, they'll be able to find out where it's at. It'll get them out of their cars. They'll be more willing to walk, and then our businesses will be happy that we have this signage showing and directing their consumers and their customers where to go and where to park. So that will be, I will be really excited when that comes out, and we are open and willing to help in any way possible or imaginable with that release. So we'll be promoting that when it's ready. Increase the overall retail experience by bringing additional retail outlets and increase the overall consumer traffic. This is where I talked about basically meeting with these businesses that are wanting to start up or relocate, and then introducing them with the property owners so that we can get them in that spot. So we've been trying to focus on retail. We obviously have quite a bit of restaurants, and that's sort of the lifeblood of downtown is our restaurants. And so if we can bring in more retail to support that, then it'll be a really thriving downtown. We have people out walking, shopping, and then eating, and that's essentially where we want to go. The report on sales tax revenues, and this will be the next slide. So is there any questions on these before we move? Yeah. And then so these numbers, you can see over here on the far right, that's 2014, and I get these numbers from the Economic Development Office, and we get these behind, so it's not up to date all the time, so it takes them a little bit to compile the numbers and the information, then they send it over to me. But if you compare 2014 with 2013, we are generally ahead of the game. May being the exception, where we were a few $100s off of where we should have been or wanted to be. But every other month is growth, and then I'll be able to report these June and July, and possibly August at the next presentation. So we're growing in that aspect and doing really well. And then these are additional initiatives that aren't necessarily benchmarks, but we've been very heavily involved with. Food truck ordinance, most of you are aware of, is a battle between the restaurants and the food trucks that were here. We spent a lot of time working with each group, each association, and then coming up with a baseline that would work as an ordinance. And so far, that ordinance that was put in place has been working really well. Been doing really good. There hasn't been any complaints for the most part, so it's been really good. We're happy about that. Play Unplugged. This is a new program that we're implementing right now. It's really interesting, and I'm really excited about it. I hope my head cold is not making me seem as unenthusiastic as I seem, but this Unplugged program is a great way, a great method to get consumers into businesses. And what it is a program designed to get kids off of the iPads and off of Nintendo, things like that, get them outside and actually doing things and doing activities. And once they've completed the activity, they can go into a local downtown business and pick up one of their brag tags to hang on their lanyard. Basically, merit badges, like scouting. And they've had some great success with this program in Heber. Spanish Fork actually just finished doing this program through the summer, and they gave over 100,000 tags out with 100 businesses involved. So as a business owner, it's very hard to quantify your marketing dollars, and this is one of the only ways I've ever seen that you can quantify how much you spend on your marketing and what you get in return. So that will be really good. I'm excited about that. We're setting that up right now, and then we'll launch it summer of 2015. So Guinness World Record, we are getting close to that. That will be here in just a couple of weeks. And we are going to be, we've got Guinness coming out with their judges and everything, and we are going to be breaking the world's biggest scavenger hunt in downtown. So, and this is another really fun activity. It gets people into the businesses. We have things that scavenger hunt wise where you can go into Guru's and sample one of their French fries, or you can go into high stepping shoes and find a certain pair of shoes, go into the window box gallery and find a fish in the James Christensen painting. So we have a list of 50 tasks that you can do, and teams of 2 to 8. So it's a free event. We're get a lot of people down here. And again, it's just a fun way to get people into the businesses. The businesses themselves are really excited and happy to get involved. And then Provo will have a world record that we'll be able to promote. So that'd be really cool. Excited about that. And add it to the list of world records, I guess, right?
And you get a Provo Rocks t-shirt for competing.
It's a bonus.
Which is kind of the crowning jewel of that whole moment is you get
Yes,
Provo Rocks
it's the
t-shirt.
t-shirt. It's all the
It is a special t-shirt too. It has as after it was designed, a number of people felt like it looked like Ryan Innes. I don't know if you know Ryan, musician. So he's actually signed the shirts.
He's sort of a local celebrity.
What was the rabbit, the clue about the rabbit? Isn't there a picture of
It's
a rabbit?
it's
with
a
the-
well, it's
rabbit.
the fiber. It's the fiber bunny.
Oh, okay,
Kind of
sorry.
With the Ryan Innes.
With the
Completely
Ryan Innes
escaped me. I'm
beard.
trying to
Yes,
figure
Yeah,
out-
he's got a Ryan Innes beard. It's
Oh,
cool.
and his beard.
Yeah. Done business consulting, and this is more along the lines of meeting with these businesses, again, the advocacy, but trying to help them increase their foot traffic and increase their customer base. That comes from maybe changing their storefront or changing a model, adding a promotion or a discount, or just getting more involved. And we've seen quite a bit of success on that front with the businesses. And then UTA Task Force, there's a couple of different categories where we help here, where we're able to offer very steeply discounted prices if you are a member of Downtown Provo. And that helps UTA sell their passes, their Eco passes, their Eco passes, sorry, and as well as the one on the BRT task force. And so we meet regularly to go over the projected plans for BRT, and we get to hear what people are saying and what they're talking about it, and then basically acting as the voice and giving our opinions to that as well. Any questions here on these initiatives? Okay, and that was just about it. I threw in here at the end sort of a list of what our members get. So this is our baseline membership package.
I have a question about the plan plug, if I can.
Yes,
back
go
up a
ahead.
second, sorry. When they did their initial presentation, they said there was gonna be an upfront cost for that. Is that something that Downtown Pro Inc. is doing, or did they
So,
work out a deal?
something that I was able to negotiate with them is we have to come up with that initial cost, which was about $3,700. And in return, if I can get we need 100 businesses to sign up, 101 businesses to sign up to make this program work. And if I'm able to get those businesses to sign up by January 31st, we get a 5% commission on those, which comes out to be about $5,000. And so we will have made our money back and made some. So it's actually a sort of a win-win for Downtown Provo, where we'll front a little bit of an investment, but we'll see that return.
Yeah, good job.
So, and again, here's a list of benefits. So is there any questions on Downtown Provo Inc., myself, what we're doing, any of the initiatives that I can answer for you?
We have a perspective as a municipal council of being among the clients of Downtown Provo, not the board of Downtown Provo. We don't provide any executive role there, but rather our keen interest in Downtown Provo's success is the impetus for our contributing as a member of Downtown Provo. You're kind enough to come on a quarterly basis to brief us what has happened in the past quarter. How do the other members receive their reports of what you're accomplishing?
Yeah, we do that a lot of different ways. We send out email blasts, which kind of update them on what we have going on that are specific to our members. So we have, I guess I shouldn't call it an email blast, but it's a list that we have of all of our members that will email, as well as our Lincoln Lunch. We do that's one of the benefits here that you can see. So we do a monthly Lincoln Lunch, and we go over the things like the Play Unplugged program, like the scavenger hunt, let them know what we have going on, things that we are doing, and as well as letting them know ways that they can get involved with those programs or on on any other basis. So we have a few different ways that we do that, as well as myself, and Kanisha as well. We go around to the business on a very regular basis and just meet with them, talk with them, see what we can do better, how they're doing, and how we can help their business.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Mr. Noel.
Mike, is that the one that's on the website?
Yes.
I still have a hard time focusing all on those as you go line straight across.
Yes.
Those are the benefits that come. So
You wanted a line right here to go across.
it just helps me see what benefits I'm getting. This looks like a list of events that are available to downtown Provo, and I'm a little bit blurry on the actual benefits you receive.
We'll add that line.
It would help me. Parade Magazine had a list of the best main streets in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little interested to seeing that they were all their main streets. They were cities smaller, way smaller, half the size of Provo, that were the great ones. But we seem to be doing all the things that they suggest for a great main street, walkability, and getting return people to come down. What are we? I guess this is more for community development, working with economic development. I mean,
well,
what are we doing to help promote our downtown? We're as viable as any of these.
And I think we're better, and that's the message we're trying to get across. That's what we're trying to implement with these lighting, with these permanent lighting situations, with all of the events that we do down here that are free. We're doing everything, but it's not. And it's frustrating to me because I want it to happen right now. I want it to be the downtown that I envision it will be, and I want it right now. But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. There's a lot of things that need to change in Provo and that are changing. And once we get to that level, we will be on those lists, and we will be we'll be #1 in the country. So there's a lot that we still have to do before we can get there.
I was surprised to see the size of these cities that have great main streets. And they're half the size. Flagstaff was the biggest city that they mentioned, and I love our downtown Center Street.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what we need to do to make sure that people are recognizing that.
Yeah, and that's essentially, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. That's what we do. And so those are the initiatives that we're trying to get to. Kim?
So with the gold membership, can you explain what direction of public policy what that entails?
Yeah, so that's something like the BRT, where we go and we are talking with our members and we're talking about what is important to them, and we're able to voice the opinions of our members in a situation like that will affect, maybe the route or however it ends up. So basically, that's just us, downtown Provo, and giving them a voice.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I stay on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next, pick up a matter that Don Jarvis, Chair of the Provo City Sustainability Committee, discussed with us at the last work session. From that discussion and at his specific recommendation, we agreed to a further discussion of a joint resolution with the administration for the timely sale of Tier 3 gasoline. That resolution is available to us as part of the agenda for the meeting. In the interim, we received an email from a neighborhood chair, Mike Rome, calling our attention to the opinion of another neighborhood chair, Ben Markham, who might be regarded as a local expert on the likely consequences of the availability of Tier 3 gasoline. And both of them called into question Mr. Markham more directly the advisability of proceeding with this joint resolution that is meant for the state legislature. We did so specifically on the basis of data-based claims within the resolution, proposed resolution itself, but also the absence of a context that would see the availability of Tier 3 gasoline, that is the availability on a reasonably wide basis, as only pertaining to new vehicles. And consequently, those who do not own rent new vehicles might very well find themselves confronted with a quite different situation. Mr. Markham's worry is that our resolution fails to take that into account, and for that reason may be misleading. He couches it in terms of sort of political decision versus economic decision. And in his, what I found very thoughtful email, and going to the reference that he points to, online reference from a think tank, an energy-related think tank, I was persuaded of two things. First of all, the resolution should capture that context, in my opinion. Second, I think we need a fact check. So that's my response to what those two neighborhood chairs brought to our attention. I would appreciate the mayor responding, and then any of you as well.
Thank you. And I agree with you. Ben is a real credible, very credible source and somebody that I have a lot of respect for. I do think it's important, as I reread the resolution, to point out what we're asking and what we're suggesting. And we're really, in my opinion, we're really encouraging the legislature to pursue this and to move it forward without being specific with them about how they do so. For instance, we don't say we encourage making it mandatory or anything. And so to some degree, it might be by simply changing the nature of the resolution to not speak to some of the facts that are in question, we can still accomplish our goal of letting them know that this is of great interest to us and we support their deep, thoughtful research into it, because they'll be the ones passing any potential legislation, not us. So if it is the feeling of the group that that the resolution has some details in question, one approach might be to simply eliminate those details and to still encourage the legislature themselves to look deep into this, and that we applaud their efforts to do so.
Comments?
The first thought for me was the cost versus benefit, and I don't feel like I have a great analysis yet as far as what he mentioned, what the cost could be versus the benefit. And so I did reach out to some of the legislators to see what they knew, what information they had on this issue, and it was just this morning, so I'll admit it was late in getting out to them. But one returned to my message and just said, I would encourage you to look at the cost versus the benefit before you sign or before you vote on this resolution. And that's something that I feel like I personally need more information on before I can get behind it. And I just don't feel like I have that. I'm wondering if maybe we could have staff come back with more analysis on that before we do make a recommendation to the legislature.
I think it's a very reasonable request, with this caveat that there may be no definitive cost benefit analysis in it, because it is a product still in the making, as well as the distribution still in the making. But there might be several ways to carve the issue, one being the cost benefit analysis for those who have new cars after 2015, for which this gasoline has been designed, and those who don't. So maybe comparative cost benefits. But my guess is that most of the figures that we see that would be included in such an analysis are hypothetical, speculative, nothing hard yet because it's not a reality.
And would that replace what we currently have so that those who won't benefit from it would still be required to pay for it?
I don't know.
A little bit, again, a little research I did. But a couple things to my mind that question maybe the resolution or maybe the information that Mr. Jarvis presented. One of them was that the cost benefit of the health issues that would be improved because of the Tier 3 gas. At least a couple of things I read said that those benefits it would be in health. So if the Tier 3 gas takes more sulfur out of gas, which sulfur is not the bad thing in the air, it's the thing that affects the catalytic converter that has the ability to take the bad things in the air. Okay. And by removing those things from the air, what benefit would that give to our health? And they mentioned asthma and 2 or 3 other items. That research, those studies that identified those health benefits, has not been shared with anybody. So there's not been able to have a reproduction of those studies to show that they do benefit. That was just a benefit the EPA made, and then has not shared any of the data or any of the information to where that could be questionable.
This is specific to the advent of Tier 3 gasoline.
That's correct. That's correct. So if the benefit of the Tier 3 gasoline is to improve the air, to improve the health of the air, basically, I think there needs to be much more done there, or some other studies that back up that. I think the cost is another item that said there's studies that say it's going to increase the cost of gasoline by 8 or 9 cents a gallon. And they say, no, it's going to be 1 or 2 cents, because when we did the Tier 2 gas, they said 8 or 9 cents a gallon also, and it ended up only being 1 or 2 cents. But as you look at the analysis again, what happens as you, again, I'm a scientist here, I'm trying to sound like I am probably. As you take the sulfur out of the gasoline, it's not a linear process. Right?
That's a point Mr. Merkin makes.
Yeah, and it's the Tier 2 gasoline took the easy,
Yes.
to get the easy sulfur out. And so the cost then for the refineries or the process is a lower cost. To get the next level will be a more costly process. Still the analysis of, well, they said 9, it was only 2, it's going to be the same thing. That's not really true. It's a lot harder to get that sulfur out in a Tier 3 level gas. So there's kind of a lot of information there that I think still. Now I would support maybe what the mayor mentioned, support a resolution that's instructed that suggested that the legislator look at all of these things. But I could not support a resolution that said legislature support Tier 3 gasoline.
Other comments?
I only got a couple of comments about this, but it was more along the lines of there hasn't been much discussion about it, and I would be in favor of somehow getting the public a little bit more involved in the discussion. I'm not quite sure how to do that, but so that they could help us understand how they feel about this as well.
One of the difficulties in inviting the public's response to the matter is that, for the most part, they're probably no better informed than we are. So, working from a position of relative ignorance is not a comfortable position to be in. It's probably not a position on which to give much weight. Once the case can be made, and we can be more confident about that case, then the responsible public is in a much better position to be constructive. So the mayor suggested one possibility, and I'll turn to Matt here, and that is to simply soften the resolution to make it direct to the legislature in terms of encouraging their consideration of the issue and its implications for the citizens of Utah. The other is to be more precise about data-based elements of the resolution in just the spirit that has been recommended by you. And that, of course, is a longer-term process that will involve our staff more deeply and extensively than simply softening the resolution somewhat, removing those specific database elements and simply going on the record strongly encouraging careful study of the prospect and its implementation.
I agree that it's important that the legislature know that air quality is important to us in Provo, and that we're interested in anything that will improve that. But to your point, that these details aren't really ironed out yet. I don't know that we can go through the fact-based resolution. I would all be in favor of telling the legislature we feel that air quality is a substantial issue in our city, and we're very hopeful you will study this situation closely.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, would it be reasonable to expect that by our next work session, our staff would have worked with the administration to revise this proposed resolution? We would have that to consider in advance, and then we might return to a matter of adoption.
The intent is to just rephrase the resolution to what I just heard. That's no problem. The intent is to study this and get into.
No, I think that's not our intent. I think it's to remove what I will characterize as red flags that pop up as one reads.
There's no problem. Happy to.
I can support that, absolutely. Thank you.
Now we turn to Matt Taylor for a discussion on an ordinance amending 15.04.030 minimum acreage requirement of the City Code to reduce or eliminate the minimum acreage requirement for a subdivision, which currently may not be less than 3 acres, unless the Planning Commission determines the area is an infill area and cannot reasonably be combined with existing properties.
All right. Thank you, members of the council. Pleasure to be with you today. I'm here at the request of Mr. Miller. May have been part of the motion 2 weeks ago to come back and return to the council to illustrate some examples of where of different infill scenarios and what this ordinance may have originally been intended to do. So just So this is the ordinance as it's currently constituted. No subdivision shall be less than 3 acres unless the Planning Commission determines that a proposed subdivision of lesser size is infill to development of an overall area and such property cannot reasonably be combined with adjacent properties and comply with the requirements of this title. Title 15 is pretty comprehensive. At least 100 to 200 pages of requirements. But I think that we can summarize that down to some basic elements that would apply in the situation we're looking at today. So before we get into this, I think that this question has come up several times to me in different locations about what was the intent behind this ordinance. And when I looked up the original ordinance, it was adopted as part of a omnibus comprehensive reworking of Title 15. Going beyond that, I haven't had an opportunity to see if this particular provision predated that omnibus adoption of Title 15. So I apologize for lack of preparation and following up on that. But I'll make some assumptions, and I think they're safe assumptions. And community development's here if they want to say I'm off base. One, I think the purpose of this provision was to prevent smaller subdivisions from how I've characterized from gumming up the works for future development in the area. Another issue that's been of debate is this 3-acre threshold. And this is theory, can't say for certain, but I think this 3-acre threshold is used several times in Provo City Code, and it references back to a Planning Commission bylaw requirement. And by default, all items, whether it's a building permit or a subdivision or a project plan, require the Planning Commission's approval, recognizing that the scope of development in our city is too much for the Planning Commission to handle on a bi-weekly basis. Some decades ago, the Planning Commission decided there are certain applications that we just don't want to see anymore. We're going to delegate that to our hired staff, review and approve, and then however, we're going to retain approval for other projects that meet a certain threshold. And at that time, they developed certain thresholds. One was for subdivisions. Any subdivision greater than 3 acres had to go to the Planning Commission for review and approval, whether that was a subdivision that required a rezone or a subdivision that already had its zoning. If it was less than 3, they delegated that to staff. They have similar provisions for multifamily. Forget the exact numbers, but it was over so many units required review by the Planning Commission. Commercial projects, if it was over such a square footage, again required. And I think the idea there was the bigger the impact, the more scrutiny the Planning Commission felt that project needed review, and the additional level of review beyond that staff was provided. So I think that's where the 3-acre threshold, I don't think there's anything magical necessarily about the number other than that was the number the Planning Commission felt comfortable with. Delegating administrative reviews to staff or not. And because that seemed to be a natural break in determining an application, that 3-acre standard sort of fell into several categories in Provo City Code. That's my theory.
Now, is there anything specifically intended by that term infill?
Well, infill is an interesting term, and it can mean multiple things. And so there's what I'm about to tell you I think the intent was, but also with the caveat that in planning literature, if you're talking about infill, that can mean various things. What I believe the intent of infill to be was property surrounded by existing development. And so is this an undeveloped or underdeveloped piece of property that is surrounded by development that you wouldn't either consider, let me rephrase that. A piece of property that's surrounded by existing development of such character that you're not going to redevelop it soon. Now, even that definition I just threw out, maybe, and I'm going to, as we get into some of these slides, it's open for debate. I think as you get into, in Provo's case, lots of times, especially we've dealt with this 3-acre rule, we've thought of infill on a very small scale. I think if you look at planning literature, you may see infill dealt with on a larger scale. And infill more broadly meaning just redevelopment or looking at larger areas of already urbanized cities. Okay, so
No, I'm going to ask because in my naive way, infill is a term I've associated with dumping.
very good. Yes, this is you know how you open a dictionary, several definitions, and this is certainly a new one that planners have created, and often with planning terms of art, I don't know if there's universal definition out there, and that's because zoning laws are usually very uniquely tailored to the jurisdiction, so getting a universal definition is sometimes harder. There was a effort to do that some years ago, a publication called Zoning Definitions, and they tried to create a dictionary of zoning terms, but the terms are so varied across the nation, I don't know if it was very helpful, because again, the definition they may have thought was the best still didn't work in their community for some reason. So any questions about this?
Mr. Sewell?
Just trying to understand the discussion on intent. You mentioned that the larger subdivisions were intended to go before the planning commission, but it looks to me the way this is written that the smaller ones would have to go to the planning commission to get that determination of whether it's.
Depends on the nature of the request. So because it says planning commission, again, think about, I hesitate to use this analogy in public. Can I secularize? You know where I'm going, Brian. Can I secularize my analogy? So authority and delegation. Okay. So staff actually has no authority per se, other than that which the planning commission gives it. And the planning commission really has no authority either, other than what the state has granted unto municipalities. And in this case, they have said, as far as land use approving authority, the city council will designate a land use authority, and in Provo's case, Provo has designated the planning commission as the land use authority. So the authority to deal with land use items is derived from state statute, which has been delegated onward down to the council, council to the planning commission to staff. Okay, and so when it says planning commission here, the planning commission has delegated some of this authority to staff. Now, and that's particularly the case in where zoning exists. So if you have zoning, and you have a property, and I'm going to give you an example of this a little bit. Say it's R18, requires a minimum of 8,000 square foot lot size. You happen to have 16,000 square feet, you have all the right dimensional requirements. That zoning is less than 3 acres. It meets all the zoning criteria. Staff would review it, look at it, and say this meets all our zoning criteria, and they would approve it on behalf of the planning commission. Okay. And again, I hesitate to use a more religious nomenclature local to our area, but it's like it's like delegating keys. Okay, if that makes any sense. You have a certain set, you can operate within that set, you don't have all the authority, though only that's been given you. Okay. In the case of subdivisions that require rezoning, those require a legislative action, which the planning commission actually has no authority over, but they are required by statute and state statute to provide a recommendation. And so because they have, so say we got the same scenario, say we have a 16,000 square foot lot, meets all the requirements if they had an R18 subdivision, but for some reason they're agriculture. Okay, so they need a rezone. That's a legislative action. It needs to go for a recommendation of the planning commission. Since it has to go there anyways, in that case, staff wouldn't act on the approval. They would defer that to the planning commission to deal with, because they're going to have to make a recommendation on the item anyways. So might as well just give them both items to deal with in one context. That makes sense. So that's really sort of the dividing line. If it has the zoning, to simplify, if it has the zoning, it's less than 3 acres, planning commission, the council will never see it. If it doesn't have the zoning and it's less than 3 acres, planning commission will see it, council will see it. Now you, as a legislative body, actually want to approve the technical requirements. That's authority granted to the planning commission. But you will be determining whether it's in the legislative interest of the city to grant the zoning or not. Is it within the policy, and does it advance the policy interests of the city? Okay. So a lot of times when you're considering zoning, you'll get hung up, is this a good design or not? Maybe that's a good discussion, but really it should be more about, is this application advancing the policy interests? And maybe the design has something to do with that, but that's really more what the council discussion should be, is what we see here, advancing the policy interests.
Question. Is it all right? We find that these rules really are only good, really effective, when somebody is mad. So they come in and they want to do something, and the law doesn't allow them to do it. And somebody points to the law and says, we require in Provo that it be this certain way. And they're upset at that, but because the rule exists, we get something that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Very seldom, do these kinds of guidelines really make a difference when somebody comes in and wants to do things all the right way anyway. So I'm just wondering, what do we give up if we change this? Are we going to end up with a lot of things that have just been approved by staff that aren't ideal, that we don't have now? I mean, what's the downside of making this change?
Well, this is what's currently before you. I'm sorry, I was about to print off new copies.
No, I've seen the
yeah, we have an even more refined one, but so we'll get that to you. I've slipped away from it. There's a few changes, but you have the general.
What do you see as being the downside? What's like the worst thing that could happen?
If the council moves forward with what's before you.
Right.
Essentially, I don't believe much changes. What changes is clarity of what's expected.
So,
and what I'm saying by that is, many of the standards. So, the downside. Yeah. Let me think about that.
Matt's probably got a better analysis of this than I do, since it's really a planning issue rather than a legal one anyways. But what you're essentially exchanging is a rule that says nothing less than 3 acres unless it meets the definition of infill for you're getting rid of that and replacing it with a requirement that says size doesn't matter as long as you can demonstrate that you comply with this entire list of objective criteria that are already in the code. So
I think it would be helpful. Well, go ahead, Wes.
So I'm really not sure that there's any downside unless, the only thing that it allows is, from a technical perspective, is you could end up with a subdivision that's smaller than 3 acres that doesn't fit the definition of infill, but only if it also complies with street layout requirements, hillside, with the entire list of requirements that's in the new proposals. So,
are we confident that that list is going to generate a quality project, even if staff is approving it?
Let me show you some examples, which I have.
Well, I'm going to have to defer to the experts on that, but I guess the one thing is recognize that staff is already approving it, right? So what's happening right now is staff is approving whether it meets the definition of infill. And what we're proposing to change it to is staff will be determining whether it meets all of the other ordinance requirements rather than meeting the definition of infill, which isn't defined.
Looking at it at a broader scale.
Whether they have to make sure that it met all the other.
Yeah, so there's two changes. So one, infill is undefined term in our code and is open to a subjective interpretation. And I'll say, I believe, from planner to planner, the interpretation is just a little different. So we get some weird varying results, not that they're bad or good, just different results from that interpretation. Okay, so again, that's part of the purpose of trying to define a more objective criteria than a subjective definition, which we don't have defined and which isn't defined, as Mr. Miller got out of me, on a as a term of art in the profession. It's not particularly defined. So one of the objectives was, okay, let's get a little more objective rather than subjective term. If we're going to do this, I mean, again, this is if the council wants to move in this direction or not. It's if you want, and this is again responding to when we declare intent. The intent of bringing this forward was we have an applicant's proposal that just wanted to do away with it, this provision altogether. We have planning division's recommended approach. Brian and I had a few issues that we wanted to address. If we were going to amend it, there may be a slightly better way to look at this, and this is what we're discussing.
And just that clarification, the conceptual street layout plan.
Yeah, so one, I think, is twofold. I already mentioned the ambiguity in full fill. Two, I think the intent. What was the intent behind this ordinance? And that's the part I didn't get to yet. The intent, I believe the intent behind this ordinance was, again, well, I sort of at the beginning mentioned, to not gum up the works for future development. So we don't put something in that's going to mess with how the area is going to integrate as a comprehensive whole in the future. And that's where I have some examples lined up for what, how do you deal with that? What's the impacts of that? So it's twofold. And then, how do we know it's not going to gum up the works? Well, that's where this requirement that planning put forward to provide a concept plan. Well, and that's one of the things that Brian and I want to address is what constitutes a valid concept plan. And so we pointed to standards that exist, again, just to bring clarity that as you develop this concept plan to show and demonstrate how this development will not gum up the works, per se, that your concept plan would also meet a basic threshold of standards. So you couldn't just come in and draw on the back of a napkin and say, here's my concept, I've met the bare minimum requirements, now please approve me. Okay, the concept would actually have to meet some type of basic threshold.
Just one comment, and in case this isn't already clear, and Gary or Brian can disagree with this if they see fit, but I think Matt and I feel like the intent of the proposal we've put forward for you is not any different than the intent of the proposal from the Planning Commission. We just think that it's more precise as far as defining exactly what needs to be turned in, but that it accomplishes the same thing as what the Planning Commission recommends.
I agree with that. So this is very brief. What is integrated development? We have standards on the book that require, and these are the 5 that we've listed in the concept: developable land, street standards, lot standards, hillside development standards. I'll just give one example of street standards, why we would reference that as part of a concept plan. Right now, our street standards already require that as you develop a piece of property, you will consider adjacent undeveloped property, and that you will stub a road connection. So you'll basically dead end a road into the adjacent property so that that property, when it develops, can connect that street in for a more integrated network of streets. That's one example. We also reference block standards, development land, and hillside standards, because you can't just sort of do anything you want with a street plan. They're constrained by how big we allow blocks to be, where we allow roads to go on hillsides or develop wetlands. So a concept plan wouldn't be very good if you develop a street network on a hillside with 45% slopes. That wouldn't work. For our standards, it would be no good as a concept plan. Why integrated development? Well, one example is, there's many reasons why. You look at sewer, water, energy. You want to look at a comprehensive area. And that one smaller development could mess up flows, connection opportunities. But just looking at streets alone, City of Provo City for at least 15 years now has had a goal, have these standards in place to create continue our grid-like development pattern. This is been shown in planning literature to distribute traffic flow more evenly. There's less of an impact on your collector and arterial roads. Gives you a redundant system to fall back on should those systems fail. Emergency access, and one that we talk a lot about is walkability and bikeability. Every time you do a cul-de-sac, it just increases the difference, or a wall, or increases the distance that people not only have to walk, bike, but also to drive. So you relate this to air quality, which I almost put on there as a sub. This is an example of a 15-minute walk in our grid center, and it maximizes the distance that somebody can, or points of place that people may arrive at based off their destination. It's about 1.2 miles in either direction, any direction you go, is our current. This just again to illustrate why you'd want integrated street network. This one I picked out of my sister-in-law's community in Southern California. Cul-de-sac Central, 15-minute walk, takes that 1.2 miles and narrows it down to about 0.67, I believe it is. Sorry, there's no scale on here, so it doesn't speak. Here's actually, sorry to pick on the mayor's neighborhood. An area where we'll actually be talking about this in a couple of weeks about the requirement to stub streets or not. It's one of our code cleanups, trying to get a little more consistent in what we do. We've developed a number of cul-de-sacs and haven't required the connections for one reason or the other, and that network. Now it's a little unfair because they're constrained by some natural. They got a slope over here, they got a river, but from the north to south, about 0.8 of a mile versus the 1.2. So you see there, it does make a difference in the ability for people to drive less and walk less to their point of destination. Okay, so I picked a scenario. Here is the farmer's field example. And sorry, they don't show up as dark as they did on my screen, but you can see these darker red lines. These are property lines. And this is about a 2-acre piece and a farmer's field undeveloped.
Where is this, did you say?
This is North Canyon Road, 4800 North. This is not a real development example. It's something I just pulled out of there. Although we did, and we'll talk about it, have a piece up here several years ago that wanted to do some infill and was turned down on the basis you determined not infill. So I'll blow out just a little bit better. Keep in mind there are a few, this is a hillside slope, so that will play into how we do this. So should we just take 2 of the smaller parcels and subdivide them? This is what I believe the ordinance is working against. I come in, I can put a little cul-de-sac up here and get 3 lots if I get an R110 zone. This is a 10,000 square foot minimum zone, residential zone. Or I could ask for maybe an R18 zone, which I think was the case in this one, and I can try and develop 2 flag lots. Okay. Now this one doesn't cause huge distress about integrated development, but down the road could be a design challenge. I'll show you in a second. This one could mess things up. We just don't know. There's not enough information to determine is it a good infill development or not. Plus, I think, again, the intent was, well, there's nothing around here. If you look at our street standards, it says you do need to stub into properties that are undeveloped. That one of the only reasons you don't stub into adjacent properties is if there's existing buildings. We're going to talk about that. So I drew up a basic concept plan for the area, maybe about an hour, maybe less. And this would meet our block standards, our cul-de-sac standards. We have to allow cul-de-sacs when there's natural barriers or other things in the way. And it does a couple things. More of an integrated street network again. Don't have the flag lots. I'm not sure if this would really gum up the works per se, but again, it's looking again at a more comprehensive, how do we develop a neighborhood rather than these little pockets. Now, as I overlay the two, you can see I didn't quite follow property boundaries because that wasn't easy. And so I took a third stab on it to try and align it to property lines, because trying to work with adjacent property owner for a sliver of property is not easy, right? Okay. They can usually hold you hostage. So we do want to try to avoid those situations, and so maybe this is a more viable plan where I then readjusted some of the property boundaries. There are one trade-off in this little weed patch stretch, but overall we achieved the same objectives. If this developed first, they'd be allowed to proceed with 3 lots. So again, same number of density, actually less infrastructure for the city maintained in the future. It's one of the few places where I think, okay, a flag lot might work, because in the future, if the surrounding develops, this guy can come in and subdivide even further and potentially pick up this piece to have access off of the street as well. Again, that's the concept. I think that's sort of the idea behind acquiring a concept plan, so the planners can look at it and be a little more objective and saying, okay, is that a good infill plan or a good development plan that integrates with the surrounding area or not? Now, there's still interpretation, there's still judgment, but I think our codes give a lot more guidance than just saying is it infill or not.
So Matt, are you saying that first one is not infill then?
I don't think we would have ever considered that infill. And when I was working in planning, now maybe they have a different idea.
That would never have happened.
Okay.
And this ordinance isn't about that.
No, and I'm just giving this as an example. I know it's not about that. It's just how would you apply it should that arise?
You're giving an example of a conceptual street layout plan.
That's correct. This is an idea. If somebody did come in with that, and we require this conceptual street layout plan, what are some of the outcomes that could come from having that as a part of the review process? May result in something a little more comprehensive for our ordinances.
And item 4 indicates that whatever that conceptual street layout plan would be, it should not be construed as having regulatory authority over the contiguous property.
So if this guy developed first, this guy came in later and said, I have a better plan, more fancy, said this sort of blocky thing, I want to shape my roads around, they could certainly come in with that. Took a smaller piece. This is one that, now this one would require a rezone on top of it. It's not zoned. However, if it did have the zoning, they could just do this. No, other than a overlook by the planning commission. If they met the standards, the planning commission would have to allow this to happen. So I chose this piece because it was very nicely dividable under current zoning. 1031 Briar, and this is an R18 subdivision. Most lots are more than 8,000 square feet, which is the zoning minimum. However, most of them are only about 80 to 90 feet wide, which do not allow further subdivision, except for this lot. So here's an instance where if this gentleman wanted to subdivide that property, he could under the current codes and under the current zoning. So the question is that infill or not? And I think by a reasonable person standard, you would determine that's infill because there's really no additional ways to develop without tearing out gobs of homes, which he couldn't do unless he controlled those homes as well. And if you want to densify it into zoning, probably to make that financially worthwhile doing, which you'd have to go through the regular process for that. So what does that look like? We have a flag lot ordinance, which would probably allow him to put in one additional lot. I would guess the staff would determine that is infill, appropriate infill for the ordinance, and it would be administratively approved with no review by the planning commission. Now, there would be an administrative hearing, a public notice, as long as it met the standards. I think staff would be obligated to approve it.
Again, this is a conceptual street layout plan.
Well, this isn't, this one, there's, what is there to submit here for a street layout, since it is surrounded by existing development? And our code, so the code that we refer to for the conceptual layout says if there's buildings surrounding the property, then you don't require street connections. So essentially, their concept plan would be what is on already existing, because the code says you don't have to put a through street in when there's existing buildings around the property.
But it'd still be kind of a street layout, because we still have to be able to get fire trucks through that, along that flag to make
Well,
it
this
seem-
isn't defined as a street. This is a driveway.
But would you still have to get a fire truck through there, or
I
how?
would require 20 feet, and that's the fire code standard for access.
Is it likely that
These happen all the time.
Is it likely then that a request from a developer would not be accompanied by this kind of layout
I think
plan?
you could require it, but they would just have to demonstrate. We have buildings all around here. Per the code, I don't require a street connection because of the existing development surrounding the property.
But that's what's missing currently, and that's what this
That's
amendment
correct.
adds.
It does.
Yeah.
And at least it requires the developer to ask those questions and check the boxes. And for the planning review to.
But it links to all of the other current requirements. So that's, in some ways, that's addressing your question. What are unintended consequences?
Is there not a way to link them to all those other questions without changing the ordinance? Isn't there a way to have on their
You can leave it the way it is,
list of
but
where they would not have to, I mean, they would still have to follow code anyway.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, wouldn't that be part of their application process, or?
it would.
Okay.
But the problem is still this ambiguity behind the term infill.
I'm still unclear about what that would solve with this particular one. So this is what they can do right now, but if we pass this resolution, then what would they be required to do? Nothing, doesn't change either way. Okay, so
It would only force them for both the planning staff and the developer will consciously make sure that all these boxes are being checked for the integrated development. Now, this is one of the exceptions where it doesn't make much sense to even have a concept plan. But rather than trying to find the exception to where you don't require one, maybe just require it for everything if they can demonstrate why they don't have one, because they meet all the requirements and it doesn't make sense to draw anything up. That's the case they can bring up the plan. This is the one that started it all. Started the application, at least the discussion in the community about this standard. This is Mr. Chappell's proposal. He proposed that he has an existing home here, an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lots. I think he's going to be proposing an R18 zone. These 2 lots are not part of his development. I think he drew those up to show how his adjacent property owner could get access should he choose to develop to his back half of his property. So I'm not going to go over that again, but here's the property in general. Sorry, go back. You can see on the edge is Reese Estate subdivision. And I just say, I think as I've heard through the grapevine, complaints or concern that the planning staff or the city or somebody didn't require this subdivision to have a connection into here. Okay, so maybe let's go through maybe with a rationale for why I wasn't here on staff back then, but this was approved by, I think, about 1999, maybe 98. I mean, one hand, it's what's done is done, right or wrong, and we have what we have today. But we'll walk through maybe the rationale that the staff came to, and this is a hypothesis. So this is the property as it is today. You can see Reese Estates surrounding this property. It's actually several property owners. They have about 1, 2, 3, Mr. Chapel, 3 major property owners. This is an undeveloped lot as part of Reese Estates.
Could you outline his property?
Mr. Chapel's.
Yes.
We're going to follow his property is basically this.
Kind of the non-green.
The non-green. Thank you. Good way to describe it. I suppose now let me review this ordinance. A lot of the debate is, well, there should have been a street stub connection into adjacent properties. That's what I've heard. I actually have not been in the meetings, but I've read it through the grapevine. Public right-of-way shall be extended to adjacent undeveloped or partially developed contiguous land in locations which will not prevent the adjoining property from developing consistent with applicable standards unless it is demonstrated that a connection cannot be made because of one of the following conditions. Physical conditions and buildings or other existing development on adjacent lands, including previously subdivided but vacant lots or parcels that physically preclude a connection now in the future. So under that definition, what I've drawn up, really, I don't think is required by the code. Even if you want to make the argument. If you want to make the argument that Reese Estates should have stubbed into the property at the time, I think either the developer or the planning staff or the planning commission themselves could have made the determination that this is previously developed land. It's maybe underdeveloped in our sense, but under the zoning, it's an agricultural zone. And we have existing structures here, we have existing structures here, and we go back to this standard. Buildings or other existing development on adjacent lands, including previous vacant lots and parcels, that physically preclude a connection now or in the future. Basically, you don't have to provide that stub street connection. So at the time, I drew this up as well. Maybe they could have done this. This is a new house, but there was an exact same home in this location at the time. So that wouldn't have been required to stub this way because this home is in the way, essentially. Stub this way, although more probably rational, if you're going to make any type of street stub into a property, that would have made more sense. But we also have 2 homes, and very close. In fact, you see, I think this is an addition, but it still would have been within the setback requirements for that corner lot. So to say they should have stubbed, I think the determination at the time would have been they don't have to stub because we have development in the way. Plus, also, if you took this all the way through, we would have interfered with 2 other homes and a barn type structure. So that's another reason I don't think they would have required the street stub connection. So what could you do today if you want to say, well, he's not infill, therefore he has to provide a concept. He has to, say we go under the current one, he's not infill, therefore he has to demonstrate that he can join up with other properties, or how is he going to accommodate those other properties. This is an existing subdivision lot. I already said that existing platted properties, can't go through it. This wouldn't meet, I did this just for illustration purposes. This actually doesn't meet our code either. And I've seen this in other communities, but this wouldn't meet our street standards because we require a distance requirement between intersections of, I think, over 100 feet or so. So this wouldn't be allowed, but it's the only real practical place you could stub in at this point because this is a brand new home. And if you were to do that, you could cul-de-sac, but again, we're taking out structures to do so. Maybe those property owners are willing to do that, but we'd have to violate or change our own code to even get the street stub to allow them to do it that way. If we said, well, let's at least try and go through here, again, our code wouldn't require that because it's an existing platted lot. And further, up to this point, you basically render that property, Gary, help me with the term, a regulatory taking. amazing, in that they have a right to put a building permit. If you say no, we got to put a street through there, I would guess the city better be ready to acquire that property for the street. So I don't think that's a viable option. So coming back to Mr. Chappell's proposal is, do I have an infill development or not? My estimation, he does, per our codes that currently exist. Now, what this ordinance would do would just say, eliminate the ambiguity of what infill, because that seems to be the problem. Is, oh, is this infill or is this not? And again, it eliminates the word and points us to the definable criteria for making that judgment. So, I don't know, any questions? Mr.
So if I understood what you said, you think that he would have been permitted under the current ordinance to proceed? So I'm just curious why he was asking for this now.
Well, he doesn't have the zoning. So he needs, so
Well,
to be
Matt,
frank,
the
I
3
think
acre thing,
the planning
too,
commission is confusing two things, and no disrespect to the planning commission. But you need to separate your administrative review approval, the standards by which you're judging whether a development meets our criteria or not, is one set of criteria and one action. It's an administrative approval by the planning commission. Then you have another set of standards which you review and approve for a recommendation to the council for rezoning. And those are defined, and one of those things is that meets the intent of your policies, particularly the general plan. So the policies for this area, so one, does on the administrative side, if he had the zoning, which he doesn't, but if he had, would this meet the standards? I think it would meet an R18 standard. Now, that's one question. The other question being, does it meet policies? And can we recommend approval based upon the policies that the city's established? The city has established this as a residential area, and however, it does say that generally this area should develop at an R110 density. So I believe the Planning Commission could say this is an R18 proposal, this is not R110. We'd recommend denial on that basis, but not on the basis of whether it's infill or not, because that's an administrative decision. Now, they could come in and say, well, whether or not that's an infill determination or not, we don't like the design. We think the design is contrary to health, safety, and welfare of the community. And we recommend denial on that basis, but I think that would be a stretch in this case, because we have the same scenario in dozens of locations in the city. Mr. Jones.
Matt, isn't it, and I think I've heard this before, but I don't remember where, but isn't it also true, though, that the reason why Mr. Chappell was the one to propose getting rid of the ordinance is because even though you're saying in your estimation it is infill, he was worried because the term isn't defined anywhere that when it went to the staff, they would say it's not. And so that's why he chose not to submit a proposal under the current ordinance and asked the city to get rid of the current ordinance instead.
That's my understanding, and I think one of the challenges faced with this undefined terms. But
I think we can help with that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where that weighs in. That's not necessarily a reason to get rid of it, but in answer to Mr. Sewell's question, I think that's why the proposal was made.
Is this a conceptual street layout plan?
Yes. What?
Well,
No, it's an actual subdivision.
That's actual subdivision.
There's nothing really conceptual about it. I mean, this is.
How about conceptual to the north to implement the other? Is that conceptual because he didn't own those two pieces of property?
Well, yeah, they're just showing that. I mean, really the issue, well, they need a rezone. And when you need a rezone in a project plan, we would send these two things together. And he's actually been to the Planning Commission before, and the Planning Commission has turned him down, said it's not infill. The larger history of this project is the new building here on this lot. There was an existing building there. Mr. Chappell came in before, wanted to get building permits, and staff sat down with him and said, no, you shouldn't do this. There's a better way to develop the whole property that would have integrated the whole thing, because he's going to be building a new building anyway. But he went forward and built the building that he built because he had the right to do it under the current zoning. And people have a right to go forward with the project that under the laws as they exist, and he did, and so he exercised his right and built that house. But now, with the house being right where, replacing the former one and putting right where it was, it really interferes with an ability to develop the larger area. Now, if he had the zoning and he had come in, we would have approved this long ago, and we wouldn't even be here. He has to come in for a rezone, and that comes to the council. I think what he's afraid of is that he'll come try and get a rezone. Now, when you need a rezone, even though it's a subdivision of less than 3 acres, and staff does it, we give it to the planning commission. We package them so they see the rezone and the project plan at the same time, the subdivision, because people, they're hesitant to make a recommendation to the council. The council is typically hesitant to do a rezone unless they see what is the proposal with this. So this has actually come to planning commission before. And the planning commission came in and said, you know, no, you could have done this whole thing and done it well and developed things in it, but you didn't. So we're going to say they made a ruling, a determination that it's not infill. Now, the proper place to appeal that issue is to the Board of Adjustment. And the Board of Adjustment takes appeals from administrative decisions, whether that's the Planning Commission or whether that's staff, and they look at it. And so, now functionally to what's before you today, this ordinance that you have in front of you today, the applicant, Mr. Chappell, made this application, and he wanted just to reduce the acreage size to exactly what he had. And then it would clearly be, we wouldn't even be talking about the infill decision. And then if he got the rezone, then he can just go forward with it. You know, that's his goal, to do this. Now, as staff, we look beyond him and what needs to happen. Honestly, whether you deny this application or you approve the new language that you see in front of you, or you approve just the reduction in the acreage requirement from him, functionally for us, we don't see any difference in how things have been approved over the years. The checklist, when projects come in, we already do all of that. And we already have ordinances dealing with most of those things. And we have tools in the ordinances to already deal with that. So it's almost this, so if Mr. Chappell comes in with his project plan and the rezone request, and the council and the planning commission turns it down because it's not infill, his remedy really is to go to the Board of Adjustment and appeal that determination and so show kind of the argument that he had, or that was made here, this looks like it is infill, and the board would make a ruling on that. Our recommendation to the planning commission has been, yeah, it is infill. We don't see any other functional way. Could in the past it have been a better development? Yeah, it probably could have. If that new house hadn't been built in the exact same place as the pre-existing home. But we are where we are today, and when they built that house, they certainly had the right to go forward under the ordinances that existed at the time. And there was no problem with doing that. The code allowed it to happen. And so, to be honest, from community development's point of view, it's approve it, deny it. It's really not going to change how things happen functionally over time. It's almost a solution in search of a problem.
Do I understand correctly that the planning commission went against the recommendation from community development?
Well, in the past, he came in with a subdivision proposal there, and we recommended approval that it was infill, and they went against that recommendation, and that happens, and that's appropriate. Just as we make recommendations on some things to the council, sometimes the council follows our recommendation, sometimes they modify it, sometimes they reject it. The only thing we ever ask any board or commissions that you take our point of view seriously. But we understand there can be differences of opinion. Now, when it's administrative, like that subdivision is, the layout of the subdivision, that's the administrative part of it. If an applicant disagrees with the staff determination, as we act for the planning commission, then you appeal to the Board of Adjustment. If you disagree with the planning commission's determination of whether it's infill or not, you appeal back to the Board of Adjustment. And so functionally, I think, we're really at the same day. Could the ordinance be a little better? Well, yeah, I promise you it can be. And we've talked before about some issues or problems or holes in our ordinance. If I had only a limited, well, I do have only limited amount of time and resources to be able to deal with these things, this issue is not really high on our list of things to try and fix. So again, honestly, from community development, this is one. If you approve what you see in front of you, we'd be perfectly happy. If you denied the whole thing and sent back, we'd be perfectly happy.
Does this materially improve in terms of clarification to the developer as well as to community development?
I don't think it would materially improve clarification to us because I've yet to hear anything in that or see it as we've discussed it that we're not already doing functionally as we go forward. As opposed to Reese Estates in the past, why that layout was approved the way it was, I don't know. I imagine at the time there was probably some thinking and good reason for what they did. That in hindsight now looks...
So the conceptual street layout plan is not a new document that this ordinance would provide that would materially assist community development in evaluating a proposal from a developer.
It may be a new document, but analyzing street layouts and how it can, and how undeveloped property in the future can be serviced by that street layout is something we already do anyway on every project. I mean, we have to. And one of the issues you need to remember is if somebody has the zoning, then they have the right to go forward. And under that basis, and looking just as, again, briefly as Reese Estates was flashed up there on the board, I don't know that we could have said no unless there was a stub street somewhere in there. I don't know that we could have said no if they already had the zoning. That's number one. And number two, if a street is really important to us and we see something that we really need to have, one of the effective avenues that we have for that is the master and local street plan. We can go in and have a street placed on that plan and say, okay, in the future, this is where we need to go in. Now, as that subdivision has come in, we're looking at things. If there had been a street stubbed in here into this area, my guess is because of all this property here, you would have had a connection street, and functionally as a street system, we would be looking at an access point onto Geneva Road here anyway. The only thing that might be different is we might have a connection up here, which might be good, but I don't necessarily know that it's critical, especially when it meets all the other street standards that we have in code.
And from a practical standpoint, it probably would have cost each developer a lot. I mean,
yeah, and as a practical standpoint, each developer would probably have to give up a lot or a portion of a lot to do that.
Do you see this materially improving?
Just to follow up on what you asked, and Gary, you probably did. So the change of this ordinance to the new draft we have, I just re-asked the same question that Mr. Miller asked. You don't see, I mean, a minute ago you mentioned if I had the time and the unlimited resources, there's probably some cleanup we could do on some ordinance. This cleanup is...
That wouldn't have been in the top 10 for us.
So since we've gone to the work, the discussion at the time, is it, in your opinion, worth going ahead and doing?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm okay going forward with it. And I'm okay not going forward with it. Because functionally for community development, I don't think it's going to change because it doesn't really change any other substantive laws that we have to look at and against which we judge a project. In a sense, it's kind of codifying existing practice. I'm sorry, did I?
Well, I just wonder about the 3 acre minimum. Is that, would that allow smaller gumming up of the, future plans if we took that 3 acre minimum out? Is that a problem, removing that? Have there been any issues with that 3 acre minimum that you've seen in the past? It seems like we're trying to make a citywide ordinance for one specific situation,
well,
do you
that's
see any unintended consequences with changing and taking out that 3 acre minimum?
Not really. I don't see a problem of that. Functionally, we have to look at a project when it comes in, because you need to remember, if it's under 3 acres, and it's a subdivision that's under 3 acres, it comes to staff anyway. Under the Planning Commission bylaws, it's delegated to staff, and we act as if we are the Planning Commission ourselves. And so we go in and we look at it, and we analyze this. We have development down here, we have development up here. How else are we going to develop this property? We're going to deal with the property as is. So I think with that 3 acre rule being a little bit less, it's again not going to change anything that we're doing. Now, if this developer comes in, he wants to just develop this, and there's no development up here for 5 or 6 acres around it, a little cul-de-sac here, we're going to be telling them no.
Well, and then the situation that you showed before, where maybe you have 10 or 15 acres and they want to develop one, is that going to create problems for future developments, or you just feel like your staff is good enough that you can look at that and say, hey, this is going to work, not going to work? Or is it better to have a bigger development and then tie that one into the entire piece?
Yeah, it's always better. The first thing we look at, do you have a bigger development and how does it tie in? Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two, and then we try to encourage people that way. The next thing let me step back. First we look at, do they have the zoning or not? Because that's really the important difference. If they have the zoning, then we just look at the code, and sometimes the code allows a developer to do dumb things. And the developer wants to do, from our perspective, a dumb thing. But if the code allows it, we try to encourage and help and cajole and all of that stuff to get them to have a better development. If they don't have the zoning, then they need a zone change. And when you need a zone change, you don't have a right to do the project. So then we really have a lot more ability to cajole and help them along. And so in a situation like this, if there were no rezone, if the zoning's not on this property here, and somebody came in and wanted a little bit, there'd be no problem. We'd be recommending don't rezone the property if they just wanted a little cul-de-sac here. Now, if this area was already zoned for, say, R110 subdivision, then we are limited. There are things that we can do. We would make, we can require that they allow access into their property. We would probably come in and make them put in stub streets on either side. We'd have to take a look at it with them and really analyze it, but we'd make sure they meet the codes and do all of that. And then if they didn't like it, then they can appeal to the board, and then they can build a court from there.
But you don't feel like these corrections really help what you would have to cajole them to do? So that's, I guess, what's the list? What's your list of things that when people come in and the code allows it, and you're trying to persuade them away from doing what the code allows? What's that list? What does that look like? And let's, I guess let's.
Well, when they come in, one of the things that as a developer, the great thing about going first is you get to kind of set the development pattern of what's going to happen. The bad thing is when you do go first, you sometimes spend more money than maybe somebody who's coming in subsequently on infrastructure that has to be built to allow something to come in. So when somebody comes into an area and wants to develop, we're looking how, first is physically what's around it. What developments around it? What are the hills? What are, everything physically on the site? We look at that. Then number two, we look at how do you develop it and how do we make an overall good development for Provo that works well with good road systems and all of those things. And all of those tools are already to a great extent in the ordinance. And I think part of that is, we've never come to you before with this issue. This hasn't come up before. It's always been handled. Now, one of the questions are there flag lots and things like that, development of this type that's not really working out well, then we need to hear it. I'm not hearing a lot of complaints about this area. Right, or Bill?
From the developer's perspective,
Like a small time. I think the 3 acre point can already be resolved in the existing ordinance if it's qualified to be land infill. So that takes care of that stuff. In other words, okay, put yourself, if you're Mr. Chappell, and say, I'm not 3 acres, so I can't do this development. Well, the other option then is if you're not 3 acres, then have it deemed infill, you can go forward. Now, community development supported that as being infill. Planning Commission said no. So I think that's the conflict. I think that's the part of the ordinance that we're trying to clarify is how do we determine this infill? Community development determined it one way, Planning Commission determined it another way. And why are we apart on that? Are there things in the ordinance that led to that? And are the things that we're suggesting in the ordinance going to clarify that? Or is it just difference of opinion and personalities on two different bodies?
And can we address his issue for him and maybe help that situation without changing the citywide ordinance?
Well,
is there any way for him to?
And has he been to the Board of Adjustments, or do you know?
He has not been to the Board of Adjustment, and part of that is he needs a rezone on this one. Really, but for the rezone, we wouldn't even be here at all because he knows, and in the past has been told by the Planning Commission, no, this is not infill. And he knows he needs a rezone, and so he's, I think, looking for an ordinance that will take that issue off the table, which is why he proposed, just reduce it from the 3 acre down to, lo and behold, just exactly the amount of property that I have, and now that is automatically going to be not, you don't have to make the determination of whether it's infill or not, you can just do a subdivision. But even in that case, if somebody came in and now has that little bit under 3 acres, whether you have 2.95 total acreage or 3.05 total acreage, and you just barely over that dividing line, we will go through the same process with them and look at the exact same things with them, regardless of what the current ordinance says.
So in a rezone, Gary, will those things, why is he afraid going to get the rezone? Are there things that we're dealing with here that will affect that decision?
Well, typically on a rezone, our ordinance requires, with your rezone, a project plan to see what it is. He's been to Planning Commission in the past, told that his current project plan doesn't meet that ordinance requirement, and so to go forward, I think, I can't speak for him, just guessing. My guess is that he just wants to, if he's going to go and have the project plan and do all that, he wants an ordinance in place that he knows he can get it. Bill?
If you were to give him the zone change, the Planning Commission refuses to say it's infill because it's less than 3 acres, he's still stuck. He still can't subdivide, right?
Well, what would happen is if you gave him the zone change, he would then come in and make an application for his subdivision. Or, well, he'd already have his preliminary subdivision in place because you have to do that with the zone change. The Planning Commission, since it's a zone change, we would give the preliminary subdivision to the planning commission to look at, along with the subdivision or the rezone that they have to make a recommendation. So it would then come to council. If council approved it, he still has a decision from the planning commission that you don't meet our standards because it's not infill. He would then have to appeal that to the Board of Adjustment. Now, at the Board of Adjustment, we'd have to say, well, you know, we disagreed with the planning commission then, and we still disagree with the planning commission. We think this is infill.
So is there an acceptable plan for this area, or is it all going to be a problem because of where the house is situated? Is there a way to make that work, or is it just you built the house here, so this is what you got? I guess that.
Well, if you could go back to the area that we're specifically looking at.
The street has to be a certain width, right, to get into the.
Yeah, you have certain. Oh, back one, please. Okay.
And are we looking at his proposal?
Well, yes, this is his proposal, and his proposal really is he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lots. Now they're 8,000 square feet, aren't they? Or I mean, the zoning in the area that he's asking for.
Say one. You mean what he's asking for? What it is?
What he's asking for.
He's asking for an R18 because 2 of his lots, or the corner lots specifically, would have to have an R18 zoning to meet that ordinance, meet the current ordinance.
I think he has total footage that he could, but those 2 specific lots.
Yeah, the ones on the
are less than
cul-de-sac,
10,
obviously,
they're
they're bigger than that.
Yeah, I think he has enough. If it were an R110, it could all work, but he wants an R1. It could work, but there's some, because of the configuration of the property, kind of messes that up and you'd lose a lot.
Does it change from R110 to R18?
No, it's a change from agriculture.
Right. It's a very substantial change.
Right, but, okay, the general plan is residential.
And the general plan for the area is residential.
Nobody's gonna farm that little, you know, that's.
And so now if we can go to the area, so that's specifically what he wants to do. So if we go to the next slide. Or, okay, there we go. So you can see, you know, the lots be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 around there. Now you do have this area in here that could possibly be redeveloped with a couple more property owners. Functionally, the thing that would end up happening is
It just doesn't work.
is you would end up, no, get off this one. Okay, you would need to end up in this area if it develops. Somebody'd have to decide, okay, I want to get rid of that home and some others, and you would end up with another cul-de-sac. So you would have, you know, on Geneva Road, there's an entrance here, one here, and there would probably be one somewhere up in here and then up there. Typically, do we want a lot of curb cuts onto Geneva Road? No, we don't. We don't want that. This area to develop in the future and become residential, just because of the nature now of buildings, our options really are, well, gosh, I guess you should have taken the advice long ago. You didn't. You built that under the zoning as it existed. You made your bed, lie in it. That's what you did. And so you wanted to exercise your rights under the zone that you had, and you did. And now because of that, you can't really. It's inhibiting how you want to go in the future. That's kind of one of the burdens of going last in the development is. Once the development pattern's set, that there you go, and you're stuck with it. Or do you say, no, okay, we know limited here, area here, eventually it's going to develop. Yeah, we'd rather have, you know, a total of 7 and, you know, 4 or 5 more homes on a cul-de-sac here in this area. As far as the street system, you know, is it ideal? No, I don't know that it causes anything to go into failure. And I think, you know, when it comes through, you'll probably, even if assuming you approve the let's say you went and approved the applicant's version and said, okay, yeah, we think as a citywide policy, it shouldn't be a 3-acre subdivision, it ought to be less. My guess is you're still going to have the planning commission come back and say, no, don't rezone this. Leave it the way it is. They exercised their rights, went forward under the zoning as it is approved. I think you would hear the neighborhood come in and probably say that. I think regardless of the subdivision issue, I think when he does come in finally with the rezone, my guess is the neighborhood is probably going to say, we don't want this rezoned. You know, and again, when I say the neighborhood, you know, that's not one monolithic block, but I think we'll hear from some down in that neighborhood, yeah, do not rezone this.
But they know the master plan calls for residential.
They do, and you know, and that's one of the arguments. The master plan does call for residential. So when the applicant came in years before and was talking about a house there, that's what staff said. General plan calls for residential. In the future, you want this area to develop residentially more, and it'll be much better if you don't do this. And the applicant said, well, okay, I appreciate that input and that advice, but I'm going to exercise my rights under the agricultural zone that I have now, and went forward, which we approved because he was absolutely right, had the right to go forward. And so now the applicant's coming in today saying, okay, now let's do this. And, you know, I guess looking at it now, the question is, okay, now that the reality of this is here and it will not develop with that house being torn down, it's just not cost effective. That's not going to happen. Are we better off with it staying agriculture the way it is, or going forward? Brian, did you have something?
Yeah, you might mention.
Why don't you come on up?
We brought this up before, but you have to realize these properties up here, if they came in by themselves, are also under 3 acres. So the same argument exists. If the planning commission doesn't consider this infill, they could not consider that infill either. So, you know, it's kind of a strange scenario.
Matt, what would be different for this ordinance in place? Is now the case.
Can you restate the question?
Suppose the ordinance, the proposed ordinance amendment were in place. What would be different with it in place than current?
I think the primary difference is requiring the developer to show graphically how his proposal would not hinder development of the surrounding areas. Now, certainly the planning staff there is absolutely right. They will look at it.
They'll eventually get there.
Yes.
But this is something that the developer would lead with. So it's just.
Yes, and it's a little more formal than my experience has been when I worked in planning. Sort of take a look at the surrounding area. We don't really have a lot of time to sit there and actually lay it out, such as what I've done.
In the way you did.
And one of my points was even a rough concept. You see that there's a little devil in the details. How are you going to? Where are you going to put that straight? My initial, when I looked at it initially, I thought, well, we'll just put a street stub right through the middle. We'll just put a street right through the middle of this guy's property on the south side because he didn't have enough depth for multiple lots. But once he looked at it comprehensively, I said that doesn't work. We really need a street down here and a street up here, and this guy probably doesn't need a street at all. So again, gut reactions sometimes may not be ultimately the best solution, and graphically working it out sometimes can yield better results. That's the major change of this ordinance. Now, I just feel like it needs to be said. Council staff is not promoting, or neither one of us, Brian Jones, are promoting this change. We're simply responding to a proposal, and what we saw was a way to improve the proposal should you want to move forward.
This would be future proposals, 3 acres or less.
I mean, we're responding to the draft language that the planning division forwarded to the council for approval. We're responding to that language saying if you do move forward with it, we think there may be a better way to handle it.
Another way of saying that, if I could look briefly, is that I don't think Matt and I care one way or another about the policy question of whether you keep the 3 acre minimum with the infill whether you do away with it and ask for a conceptual street plan. I have no preference between those two. If you decide to do away with the 3-acre minimum and ask for a conceptual street plan, I like the version in front of you better than the version that the Planning Commission sent. That was why Matt and I got involved, is because we thought that the Planning Commission's proposal was too imprecise for what it did. But whether you choose to do that or not, I have no preference.
You're saying things are pretty much okay as they are.
My professional opinion is that the infill definition is ambiguous for all involved, but I'm not the one administering that ordinance today, and that's Gary and his purview, so I'm comfortable if you want to defer to his judgment on those things. It's just been my experience that it's an ambiguous standard that can lead, and I actually, from a comprehensive planning standpoint, see value in planning divisions concept for this conceptual plan, because like I said, as I worked out the development of that area, my gut reaction of how to do it was not in the best interest of the development of the whole area as I worked it out. So I think there's value in requiring a conceptual plan.
This, what is proposed doesn't eliminate 3-acre criteria.
Well, you're right. What it eliminates is the requirement that if it is less than 3 acres, it be categorized as infill, and replaces the infill requirement with a bunch of other standards.
This originated with community development.
Originated with Mr. Chappell.
Yes.
Then community development proposed modification to his proposal, which the Planning Commission advanced.
And you have, in fact, then further revised what came from.
We reviewed it and said about a month ago, we think there's some ways that if we're going to move in this direction, that could be improved. We'd like to continue it so we can work that out, if you should choose to move forward.
Mr. Maxfield, is there something you wish to say? And then I know there's others. Anything more you wanted to add here?
No, I think the other concept that we had was it would apply to larger developments also, which would hopefully answer the questions on these little leftover pieces as they come in. We're doing some of those in the southwest area of the city, and we're trying to make sure that there's a good blending in those neighborhoods that way, rather than little disconnected subdivisions.
That's the one slide I didn't share. Can't really see this, but this is that west side scenario. These parcels have been up for review before. I've not made it very far for various reasons. And I can see where it'd be advantageous when we're looking at the bigger area that personalities or individuals are, people change, staff changes, people come and go, that we're just reminded that we need to look at this whole area comprehensively. Otherwise, we may have even more of a hodgepodge in the future than what we have today if we don't look at these comprehensively.
So there is no necessary reason why the addition of a conceptual street layout plan to what is already required by city code would assist the Community Development and Planning Commission, the Department of Community Development and Planning Commission in their work. But it might.
It was, might allow a visual to be presented to the Planning Commission and up to City Council, where now it's more or less their discussions, but there's nothing really visually created.
It might require the developer to do a little bit more thought in his preparations to go in. That'd be my biggest positive to that, is that he could do that. You mentioned, Mr. Miller, that we're not taking out the 3-acre minimum through this
The
ordinance?
language is striked on our
That's
my
right.
copy.
I think I misstated that. It does completely do away with that requirement. There is still a requirement as to what additional documents need to be submitted. So what stays is that if it's less than 3,000, you don't have to do a preliminary plan. If it's more than 3 acres. If it's less than, I keep saying 3,000 every time we talk about this. If it's less than 3 acres, you don't have to do a preliminary plan. If it's more than 3 acres, you do have to do a preliminary plan. if, but in this revision requires the conceptual street layout regardless of size for every subdivision.
Were there others who wish to speak to the issue?
Mr. Miller, if I could add one point from the perspective of Public Works. I know our engineering staff would be interested in having some kind of a concept plan for layouts and streets. In this particular example, one of the concerns that engineering would raise is multiple connections onto a collector or on an arterial road. And if we could arrange the development of the lots, multiple lots, and limit the number of connections onto those collectors, that generally is better engineering practice.
And that office would be involved in all this process, just as a matter of course. But the addition of that document could conceivably be helpful. Certainly not going to hinder, not going to detract, but conceivably be helpful. I think that's probably the issue. It could conceivably be an asset, not necessarily.
My biggest, this 3 acre thing is just throwing me all off in my mind. I'm just not sure why we're dealing with 3 acres, what the situation is. We are dealing with it, we're not dealing with it. I like the idea of having the developer at least start to think about the overall plan. Then he comes in and he presents a plan. Well, why are you making me think about what my neighbor's doing? I think it's important that he does. And so I don't have a problem with that necessarily, but I'm still wondering about the 3 acres. What you say we're not, Brian? We're not reducing the 3 acre minimum then? Are we?
No, we are. We've gotten rid of so the current one says it's less than 3 acres. You absolutely cannot do it unless you meet infill. We're throwing that entirely out. There is still elsewhere in the chapter references to the 3 acre standard with regard to whether or not they need a preliminary plan.
Planning Commission bylaws.
Right.
And so we're leaving who to determine infill?
Well, this proposal takes infill out. Infill is no longer in the code.
Can you say then that if it's under 3 acres, then it requires this, or you're just saying everything requires this regardless of the size?
I mean, you could change it and say you only need the conceptual street layout plan for if it's 3 acres or less. Right now, it doesn't do that. It says every subdivision has to submit the plan.
And what exactly are we missing? So we're missing the street connection, having that conceptual plan, but do we need to change everything, or can we just add this conceptual plan, or could we?
What it does is says a conceptual plan, and that's a conceptual street layout plan will be required regardless. But it spares the developer of a smaller parcel, 50 acres or less, necessity of providing a fully blown plan at the same time. That's all it is. On the assumption we assume, we are assuming, I think at least one of our assumptions is that that's an expensive proposition. So we're essentially saying all we're going to ask for is that conceptual street layout.
So then does that increase the number of proposals that are coming to the Planning Commission? Initially did they do that initially so that they didn't have lots and lots of, that wasn't part of it at all?
Well, initially before they wrote their bylaws.
Yeah. So are we taking away a bylaw that has helped them sort of manage?
Not many of the bylaws.
This
was it still anything under 3 acres? Staff's going to be looking at anything over 3 acres by
And remember, this is something they wanted us to take away. Right?
So staff doesn't want to do it. They want.
Well, the Planning Commission. It was the Planning
Commission
that said, let's get rid of this 3 acre.
So we're not abdicating any of our responsibility that we would have. We're just acting on behalf of the Planning Commission that doesn't want this responsibility.
Well, they still have it. They just give them the responsibility to staff for the balance of the 3 acres.
This I see is meant to put another arrow in the quiver of the community development staff and the public works staff as they review proposals for developers.
It seems like it's a quiver for transportation, but not necessarily for community development, or do you feel like this is another tool for you? You made it sound like this either way doesn't matter, it's not really helping or hindering, but for transportation, for public works, maybe it is.
Oh, I certainly don't think it hurts at all to do this proposal, and we're completely fine going forward. Do I think this is a tremendous value for the time and effort that's been spent on it? Frankly, no. I think some of these conceptual plans and things help. We do this already. Having a developer as a requirement come in with a conceptual plan to show other things could be of value to some people. And we are more than happy to have this ordinance go forward. We're perfectly fine with that as it is. The proposal that council staff has given you and shown you, we'd be happy with that. We'd be happy with the way things are right now. We don't think that there's a big problem out there we're trying to fix. But could this help people? Yeah, I can see that it could be of some help to people. If you're asking me, with the amount of time and effort that we put into this at the beginning of the process, we want you to invest this time and effort in this issue to resolve this problem, I would have said, hey, how about if we work on something else? But we're here where we are, and you have this proposal. We're more than happy to go forward with that proposal. It's a global proposal beyond this. My guess is, though, back to the specific project that you see, my guess would be that when the recommendation from the Planning Commission comes forward, it will be a recommendation to deny the rezone, would be my guess, just on things that I've seen so far.
It seems to me that we should not leave this matter before assuring, as a municipal council, assuring you with complete respect of the administrative legislative divide, that we are very supportive of your recommending modifications, changes, updates, revisions of the code, of the city code. It's not ours to take that initiative, it's the administration's property, but you mentioned 10 other pieces of the code that you'd much rather focus your attention on than this one. I think it's important for us to say to you, we're supporting it.
And I feel that the reason we're addressing it, and I think the reason council staff is addressing it, is because an applicant has made application, and once someone makes an application, we need to go forward with it. And so, by my comments, I hope you don't. The intent was not that this is unimportant, we shouldn't deal with it, but just trying to put it in perspective of, for us, how crucial this language would or would not be. We're completely fine with what you have in front of you, and would just encourage you to move quickly one way or the other.
Are there other questions or comments? Very well, let's move on then to the next item. May be more substantive. Okay, although remember that the item we're all here for comes immediately after.
Don't flatter yourself, that's what he's trying to say.
No. We met with you 2 weeks ago on dealing with low and moderate income housing and some of the issues with that. If I can go ahead and get, So what we thought we would do is we've come back and we'd like to talk to you a little bit more about it. We said we would do at least 2 things when we came today, or three things. One is we'd give you a little more information. We were pretty high level, 60,000 foot view of it. We're going to drill down in how moderate and low income housing works and some of the issues dealing with that, a little better information on where those types of projects are in the city, and in the neighborhoods they're in and how much we have, and kind of, just a lay of the land of where things are. So we've done that. We'd also come in and have some recommendations for you to do. We have one specific recommendation that we think you should do, and then we have some options and language that could deal with the text amendment. And I failed to ask Matt to on the notice a possible text amendment. You just have the map amendment, but the possible text amendment is something for you to consider. So we have two options that the council could look at where you could take some action, or not, excuse me, not necessarily take action, but would be considered pending legislation upon which we could move forward. And the pending legislation would give us 6 months to deal with this issue. And then the last portion of it would be based on the information we have here and the recommendations of possible action that the council could see that we're headed in the right direction, and that pending legislation would make sense. The third thing would be, now, what are our next steps and how do we go about it? We have some specific recommendations on some things that we need to do. So first we'll go ahead and have Brian give you that overview, and then I'll talk about the specific recommendations that we have, unless there's a quick question or something from our previous meeting. Okay.
The two items you mentioned first, I assume are scheduled for our later council meeting today.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, I'll try not to read all of these, so if there are questions, please ask. But what we wanted to do was give you further insight into low-income housing tax credit, because that one was brought up principally related to a couple of projects we've had. The most important thing to understand, we explained what median income is. If you had 41 people, it's the middle income, which would be the 21st income, and that's median. Low moderate starts at 80%, low income starts at 60%, and then very low income's 50%. And so if you remember those things, that may ease us a little bit. But low-income housing tax credit starts at the 60% and below, and it's all rental. It's not home ownership. It's not low moderate income on that level. It's a little bit below that. And what it is an incentive for investors to put money into housing, and it's done through a dollar-for-dollar credit that's subtracted after the tax is determined. It's mentioned there before it's calculated, which is a little more beneficial. And we just put this in to understand that it actually replaced something that was considered to have provided much more generous incentives to replace 1986. The tax credits are administered by the Department of Treasury, not HUD, because it deals with taxes. It's really not a housing program, it's an investment program. Credits allocated at the state level requires each state to designate an agency. In Utah, it's the Utah Housing Corporation. There's a basis for the allocation. It's basically $2.15 per state residence per year. That works out to just over $6 million for this last year, and that's recalculated each year. They've established a limit, the Utah Housing Commission, of $1 million or 20% of the ceiling amount, whichever is less. And then in 1990, Congress mandated a competitive process to obtain tax credits. They adopted a qualified allocation plan, which this is. Sets the requirements as to what the process is, how you qualify, and then how that continues to be monitored. I have run off 10 copies of the scenario or the scoring process, which I believe you might find interesting to see what they give points to. And you'll find it's actually fairly high quality requirements that they throw into that. And I'll go ahead and pass that around for your reading enjoyment later.
Housing Authority.
Yeah, exactly. They would do in their review of qualifying the candidates and then selecting the leading candidates. And what they look at is project feasibility. They start with the maximum credit given to a project cannot exceed the amount necessary for the financial feasibility of the project and its viability as a housing project. So they go through on the financials of the project to make sure it works. They don't want anything marginal or anything else. It's got to show that it's sound financially. And then there's a review of that feasibility several times, the time of the application, carryover application, which is carrying over to the next year, and the completion of the project when the final costs and financial resources are accounted for. So it's reviewed several times by their CPAs. Eligible projects, it's all available residential rental buildings which are part of a qualified low-income housing project. Generally, those are 4 units above, unless the owner is occupying one of the 4 units, then it has to be above that. So it goes fairly small, but then can go fairly big too. The rental housing units must be available to the general public, but there are preferences allowed. And then mixed-use projects with commercial space are also part of that qualification. Things which do not qualify would be transit housing, hotels, 4 units or less where the owner lives in the project, nursing homes, life care facilities, retirement homes, providing significant services other than housing, dormitories, trailer parks. I did put in that UHC's wording, not ours, because we refrain from using that term. And then most student housing. There is a required set-aside. Now, this is one of the key elements to this whole understanding. You have basically 2 choices. One is 20% of your units have to be at 50% of the area median income, or your second option is 40% of the units are no more than 60% of the area median income. So 20% would have to either service very low or go up to 40%, which would have to service the low income. And there is some mixing and matching allowed, but those are the general breaks. And then the rent limits, those are determined by UHC and they're distributed. It's not just whatever you want to charge for the units. There is a set amount. And it does allow the actual income tenants earn to be up to 5% greater, so they allow a little bit of a fudge factor. There was one question asked, a previous one, dealing with vouchers. Vouchers can still be used. That's money that's applied to pay for the gap between what that person may earn and use for 30% of their income to what the rent rate would be. So it fills in that separation when you qualify. There are initial and ongoing compliance requirements. They're fairly extensive. Again, if you want to read through this, we can get you a copy. There are state guidelines, which can be more restrictive than the federal. The federal allocation to the states allows them to put in more restrictive guidelines. And then UHC must administer and monitor the program, including the investors and the tenants. Now, sometimes, they can do that through other organizations, such as the Public Housing Authority. Through their referrals, they would, understand that they're qualified through them and don't have to requalify and do some other things that way. Or even with the Public Housing Authority that may own a building, they would have some of the same requirements. It's already monitored, maybe some of those standards. Additional contributions that are possible, various federal programs, state, the 2 principal ones, state tax credits and Olin Walker Fund, which I think some people have heard. Local CDBG, you can put in infrastructure, buy properties, which I know is Neighbor Works is kind of the contribution with the CDBG, but RDA and some of the other contributions. Public Housing Authorities and CHOTOs, which are community housing organizations, non-profit. One with state tax credits. This is in addition to the federal one. The state enacted 1994 that they kind of do the same thing as a way to make up some differences. However, they only can be used in conjunction with the federal allowance. So unless the project's qualifying for the federal monies or the federal credits, there's no money. I had to explain that too. There's no money that goes out to these projects. It's all credit against taxes. So there's nothing anybody receives cash that way. Then the Olin Walker Fund, we put that in because that's often thrown out there as one of the tools the state uses to create housing, again, for very low, and moderate. So it's really the whole range of that area. Duration of compliance. This is something that I think is also important to understand. Federal guidelines are from a minimum 10 to 15 years. UHC, however, has required extension on that of up to 35 years after the close of the initial compliance period. So in essence, their land use restriction agreement is a 50-year contract to maintain that the low income housing requirements. And so that it's nothing, I guess, understanding this, it's nothing that can be easily changed just because we now want to go to market rate. They may not be allowed to totally adjust that afterwards. And then here's an indication of who qualifies, just so you know. This was the one we had up last time, adjusted home income limits. Now understand, home is a different program. It's nothing to do with this, but the idea is we're giving you the breakdown per person because it is similar to the same numbers they use for rent. We thought this would be the most available and easiest one to look at. What that breaks down to is biweekly incomes. And we certainly make all this available so you can, instead of trying to memorize it right now. But if you can kind of guess where everybody might be biweekly or annual income. And then looking at, for instance, the city staffing as to where those breaks are. If you look at the grades, which starts at the top as a grade 10 and then goes down to 38, the green indicates low moderate income, so 80% of the median income. The yellow or orangish is the 60 to 80%. I'm sorry, 60% below, and then the red would be the 50% below. So you can see anyone that's at a grade 10 or 11, no matter what their family size is in that income range. Anyone that starts at a grade 21 is automatically at least low moderate. And then depending on their family size, that can change. But we want to give you that idea. We're not trying to say the city certain raises, but really it's something I think you're more in tune with, understanding the different areas. And just breaking that down in some of the positions, generally starting police officers, firemen are all grade below 23. So again, it kind of gives you a general perspective. And then we can show you more of who that may be. This chart gives an affordable housing analysis, which also kind of comes into play. The green areas, and this is based on your neighborhood studies that we showed you, I think at your last meeting. It's kind of that same order, but the green ones are the ones that are now in what's noted as a HUD low mod neighborhood. Basically, more than 50% of the people in that neighborhood have a low to moderate income. And then it gives you kind of a breakdown of the number of units through that area. And this map kind of shows that a little more graphically as to median household incomes. The lightest color is the areas where it's the lowest household income. As it goes darker, that obviously is the higher income from the green to the blue. And I believe, did we change here somewhere? I can't read it. Yeah, it's kind of hard to read. This shows percentages of low-income households, where you have the light area is the lowest percent and the darkest area is the highest percentage, which, the core area of the city qualifies. You'll see some of BYU, which obviously is Norm's MTC, and that they're going to show up that way. This one is the owner-occupied housing. You can see where the light areas are the lowest amount, where the dark areas are on the higher amount. And then this one is the housing cost burden, where the light amount, this is actually reversed to darker amounts, there's a higher burden in this case. So we'll change the dark amount on this one, where the lighter is less of a burden. Again, the burden is determined by 30% of your income going toward rent utilities or mortgage payment utilities. And then the poverty rate, again, the darker on this one is the higher concentration of those hitting the poverty rate, which is actually, you can even go the 30% of the median income for poverty rate.
So that's mostly the university, it looks like?
Yeah, a lot of it's, I guess, the freshmen in the dorms, some of those others. I'm not You know, it's hard because they break these down by census tracts, so it's very hard to identify the specific buildings that way.
That would mean on-campus housing, right? That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, it looks like from that outline, a lot of that is, there is some extension just to the south of campus, some in here, which probably applies. And then, that's that part of the presentation for Gary.
Questions about that's a little more in depth and to make sure you understood.
I think of 3 projects present. Are there more? 3?
Well, the map to show those. For the low-income housing tax credits, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is 3 that are under development.
Yes.
Include Cowboys, you're right.
Yeah.
Cowboy Partners across the street, just on the corner here, give the Startup Crossing, which is approximately 600 South and Freedom Boulevard. And then
St. Francis.
St. Francis, which is the old St. Francis Catholic Church site. And is that Provo Housing?
Provo Housing.
Yeah, Provo Housing bought that. That is also intended to be 55 and older, I believe.
Right, that's
Senior housing.
100% low-income housing
Yeah.
tax credit.
And that's
Just by nature.
100%.
So that's not counting like the NeighborWorks project that we.
And then NeighborWorks. And so there's
4 there.
there are 4. NeighborWorks is not in the process where they have applications in and we're moving forward. So St. Francis is. They're in they've made an actual application. They're in that process. And so the rules that we have right now in the city apply to them. And any pending legislation would not apply to them. Does that make sense? And so it's those 3 projects. Pending legislation does not apply to them. Pending legislation would apply to NeighborWorks. Does that make sense? Okay. So when we were here before, we understand that the concerns that people have about low moderate income. Not that people are low moderate income, but as we talked in our last meeting, one of the things that's of great concern is housing opportunities for people in the low and well, all spectrums, very low, and moderate income ranges, in finding housing for those people, because those people often are referred to as the working poor, especially the moderate housing, the workforce housing, finding places for employees and people to work. So we need as a community to find lots of places for everyone to have housing options. And the difficulty with low and very low and moderate income housing is it often disproportionately impacts people that are minorities or disabled or in those types of classes have a more difficult time finding housing because they are in that low mod income area. And so as a city, we need to have and want to have housing for them. And as a region, we need to have and want to have housing for them. But also, on the other side of this, we don't want to put it all in one place. And so I think I have these slides a little out of order. So I'll have to go through and show you. As you can see, here are tax credit projects up here in red that you can see. So we have several. And it's really hard to read this from here, but you've got over here is Bay Harbor. That's the first one. Now Bay Harbor has 60 units out of 60 have been financed with housing tax credits. So it's over there. Then you have Boulder Apartments over here, and 372 units out of 372. And there's a couple of projects are right there. Now, I didn't have a graphic to show you this portion of it. In the entire county, right now, approved tax credits, and that's not taking into account St. Francis or Give or Cowboy Partners, or much less NeighborWorks. There's approximately 1,100 tax credits in the county. So of the 1,100 in the county, over 550 of those tax credits are in Provo City. And of those over 550, 372 are here at the Boulders. So one of the concerns that we have as a community is aggregating these too much in one area or even in one particular project. Does that make sense? And we could go through other ones. For instance, we have next on the list Canyon View Apartments. That's 330, and I think no, Canyon View's over here, isn't it? No, there's Canyon View. Then you have Crimson Court, which has 8 units, and that's over here. And then Westgate, I think, is over here. And then you have Mazer, which is there, and then Maple View. Not sure where that is, but you can see the red dots. That's where they are. We also put in Section 8202 projects, and I didn't have you give a description of those. Do you want to?
They're basically related to assisted living projects, a little bit different allowance, because you recall the tax income credits do not go toward that type of housing. So it's a different program that way.
So it's a different program, but again, it deals with that kind of low income. And you have Code Point right there is one, that's 106 units. Jamestown, that's 105, and Suncrest, which is 60. And so when you get into assisted living almost by its very nature frequently is low or moderate income housing, because you have retired people on fixed incomes and doing that. So that's a map. Kind of that's one of the other things we wanted to come back and show you is where are these things in our community and how does the system work? And so one of the things that we heard last time we were here, and now we're coming in and we'll talk about a couple of things that we can do today, right now. One of the concerns was in the Franklin neighborhood and the Franklin South neighborhood, looking at these types of projects that are coming in. The Franklin South, and I think the impacts, the Franklin neighborhood, because along here is I-15, kind of a natural barrier. So Franklin South are very impacted by a high level of these types of tax credit projects. And it's interesting that Provo has half of the county total, and over half of the city total is one place. So approximately 25% of all of the housing tax credits that are in Utah County are at the Boulders. And then, as Brian mentioned, often, it's not the case every time, but often the housing assistance program, we talk about Section 8 housing, that can be used along with low and moderate income housing. And so we tried to get that information for you. We didn't have enough information to be able to bring it to you today to show where that is, but there is a lot of Section 8 housing that goes there at the Boulders also. So one of the concerns is we want to have enough, but at the same time, we don't want it all in one location. So in response to what we talked about before yesterday in hearing from the Franklin and Franklin South neighborhoods, one of the proposals that we have is a change in our zoning map. This is a current zoning map. Now, years ago when we put in the TOD zone, this is 6 South, and the railroad tracks go right through here. You can see the intermodal center on the outline here. This is basically the intermodal center, though included in this zone was Office Max and I think the loop shop right there. But it's mostly on this side, the intermodal station. We also had the TOD zone, or the ITOD zone, go down over here. And one of the reasons it came over this far on this side was this, at the time, was zone CM, which is heavy commercial. and lots of businesses, though there are some single-family homes in the area, but lots of businesses, and the city owned this property here. And being a major owner in that area to make any project work, we felt that we would be able to pick good developers because we own the property. We don't have to sell it to someone if we don't want to. And that is the property that NeighborWorks has now bought from the city. This area also was CM, heavy commercial. And what we're hearing from the Franklin South neighborhoods, boy, we've got a lot of this type of development. It seems to be aggregating in our neighborhood. You can see from some of the other HUD maps that we had up there about income, that the low mod income areas of the city tend to be in this area, and housing specifically for this tends to be aggregated down in the Franklin South neighborhood. So one recommendation that we would have is to redraw the zone map, and what we would propose is bring in the boundaries of the TOD zone to just along Freedom Boulevard and keep it over here on University Avenue. And this area down here, putting it at residential conservation. Right now, what we are doing in the Franklin neighborhood is we are going through one of those neighborhood plans. We've already started it, we're going through that. We think by putting it back this area into RC, would give the neighborhood an opportunity to keep going through that plan and really figure out, is this the right zone? What is the right zoning here? Is it the TOD? Does that make sense? Do we bring it there? In the past, it made sense. Our Vision 2030 talks about intermodal and high-density residential around transportation. But now that we're here a little ways looking at the RC, by putting it in RC, it'll keep what's there. People could put in a residential unit, but they're limited to what's already there. There's no big increase in the ability to put in density there. We do, though, over on that piece of property that the city just sold, that NeighborWorks, we would suggest high-density residential. And the reason for that is the city has sold the property to NeighborWorks. Whether it's TOD or high-density residential, that would allow NeighborWorks to go forward with their project. And the reason for doing that is we're assuming that the council felt comfortable with NeighborWorks in approving the sale of the property to them, that that this project should go forward. And then down here
it's by the slimmest of margins.
I'm sorry,
I'm just inserting a footnote, by the slimmest of margins.
By the slimmest of margins, yes. Nevertheless, I wish I were that slim, but the council did approve that. So that's why you see that recommendation, to give a little background to why that would be there. So that's the zoning map. We would bring in the zoning map, give the Franklin neighborhood an opportunity to go through their process. It does bring to mind, though, the last time we were here, and not talking about low moderate income housing, we talked about our neighborhood plans and what we were doing. One of the things that we would propose to do with this is we think we ought to bring forward the Franklin South neighborhood plan now, and we can start that process and get moving on that. So they also can come in here, and in this area that was TOD, they can have an opportunity for us to go back and say, we did this work in the previous general plans, and with the TOD zone, did we really mean it, and does that make sense, and should we go forward?
I don't recall the schedule that Bill Pepperoni gave us. Were they coupled there, or were they separated?
They were separated. And that, you know, in hindsight now with all of this, I think that was a mistake.
Bring Franklin South up to where Franklin is.
You know, we should bring it up to where it is, and we'll have to sit down and really think about this. We might even want to do them together. That may make a lot of sense. You know, in hindsight, looking at this, and remember those caveats on the side of different projects that could affect schedules and bumping up. I think now, looking at it, this makes a lot of sense to bring Franklin South around up in the schedule now. And so we'll end up trying to modify that schedule and moving forward. Okay. Now, the next thing we have, yes.
Would it also make sense to take that Franklin South neighborhood out of the CDA as well? So we're not offering tax increment financing for that area that's in a conservation zone?
That's a very good question, and honestly had not thought about that as went through this process. Because some of these projects, and I'm sure Bill's got an opinion on that, and he can, we'll have him come up and talk about that in a moment, if that's okay. One of the things about the tax increment, or excuse me, not tax increment, but the tax credit program is, for instance, Cowboy Partners. Not only are they doing tax credits for it to make the project work, but the city has actively participated with them because we were the property owners and we've done some things to help that project along. So outside of the tax credit, there are things that a city can do to really help these projects and move them along. And as a city, we don't have to do those things for a project if we don't think it's meeting the right demographics that we need it to meet for the moderate income housing issues that we're dealing.
But then are they still, though, developers may still be incentivized to go and buy up single family properties with the idea that maybe at some point they can rezone it, or is that?
So how about if Bill comes up and addresses that issue of how that would work and what we have to do on a project? Do they automatically get the tax increment, or is there another affirmative action the city would need to take?
Yeah, to me, that having the tax increment out there as a carrot gives us a very powerful way to say, for us to even consider tax increment on this, these are some things we would expect you to do or want you to do. Gives us a much stronger position for negotiation, I believe.
It's a power control device.
Right, because it's not automatic that they get it. It's not, we can attach strings to it, put conditions on it. So to me, it gives them an incentive, but it also gives us a very powerful way to negotiate back and make sure we're getting some things we want. Plus, they would have to get a zone change, and
which would be substantially difficult. That would be the main obstacle to having a project like that go in.
So why would we include them then? If we're saying we're going to conserve you as a neighborhood, why would we include them in an area where we would consider that?
If the Franklin Neighborhood Plan comes forth and says these are areas that we consider to be valuable single-family detached areas and they should stay respected as single-family detached areas, then I think we can put that type of language and those kinds of goals into the Franklin South Plan, and that would, in my opinion, that should drive what approvals would be given within that CDA that we just approved. If you don't feel like that's strong enough or that gives you enough assurance, yeah, we could go back and window those areas out of the CDA, I'm sure. But to me, to have a neighborhood plan that has those types of goals and policies set forth strongly in it, I think that tells us all we need to know, because simply being within that CDA is no guarantee that the city's going to do anything for you.
Right. But, yeah.
I think it's
but you're saying maybe we're sending mixed messages.
Yeah, I'm saying that because you have single-family homes and a developer comes in and will give them, what might be an enticing offer for their home, and maybe it's good for them to move, but it's not good for the neighbor next to them. And maybe they get a chunk of homes, and little by little you're taking away the neighborhood, right? That's kind of where I'm thinking that you're either going to conserve them or you're going to redevelop them, but you can't say you're going to do both, right? It's confusing for me, I guess, what I'm saying is that we're either going to conserve them or we're going to redevelop them, but to say we're going to conserve them and then incentivize developers, I think is a little...
Historically, our situation in Provo has been a little different from that, in that the investor comes in and buys that home and begins to rent it out or subdivide it and rent it out, and that starts to erode the neighborhood faster than them buying it because they have a larger development plan in mind. Stephen, would you think, is that more?
No, absolutely. The idea of the CDA is that the city says, in this area, we can give some incentives if you do what we want you to do.
we like what you're doing.
If we like it. And so it actually adds an additional layer of control that the city has over what kind of projects will go in. And the zone is the main thing. I mean, nobody would go into an RC zone and buy up for development thinking of the CDA as going to come in because they know they have to get the zone changed, which is not going to be easy to do if we downzone it from the ITOT to the RC. It just doesn't make sense to me that a developer would do that.
So we're saying that we're using the CDA to protect that neighborhood from redevelopment?
In a sense, I think that's what it is.
Or proper, so we get proper development.
Yeah, I think it's
That we
important.
really, really want.
Right.
It's important to
Well, that's what the
realize
neighborhood wants.
that these tax credit projects could very well be rehabilitated.
No, I understand that.
Mr. Pepperoni. May I add an observation? I think the intent, if I understand community development's proposal, is RC is a temporary zone until the neighborhood plans what they really want to have happen there. So I don't think the proposal is they're saying let's conserve it, they're saying let's put it in a holding zone until the neighborhood's plans, which may be single family home, which may be something more.
Or maybe RC, they may decide RC is the best.
Right, and my thought on that with the CDA is that if there are single-family homes, if we as a city, if we say, oh, we want single-family homes there, but we want them to be updated, we don't use tax financing to do that, to make single-family homes. So that's all I'm saying is.
If someone like, I'm sorry, please. If someone like an organization like NeighborWorks even came in and wanted to do another housing project, kind of like Franklin Commons, could they use the CDA funds to do something like that? Since they want to develop them and then sell them for less than what they cost to develop?
Yeah, I don't believe that, certainly tax increment probably wouldn't do them any good, and
It has to be a commercial application of some sort.
you know, or intense enough that it would substantially change the property valuation.
Especially when we're getting tax increment on a residential, that's only 60% of the value, and so you're not going to get as much. So it's just not there.
I have a question, follow-up, something Brian mentioned earlier, and that is that under the state housing authority, there's in effect a 50-year contract to maintain certain provisions or criteria. Does that apply to the boulders?
Yes. Because, well, they've got a couple of different ones. I'd have to go back and see, because it may have changed since that time, but anything current would have to meet the just agreement.
It seems to me that there may be possibilities for operating in the way we've described here, that is as a municipality that is in the driver's seat, so to speak, with respect to the use of property in ways that enhance the city. And we often hear of boulders as the exception, and often there is a kind of mystique about that that says, well, they're untouchable. There really isn't anything we can do legislatively.
Yeah, I would argue almost that had it stated that 10 to 15 year period that's required the federal, that would give us the ability to restructure a lot of that and do some different things. It really does tie our hands. We talked about that, the Housing Authority and several others. It's basically an act of Congress now to make those changes, or something that would change.
So that 50-year span of liability, so to speak, on the part of the tax credit recipient does not apply in the case of the boulders.
I think something fairly substantial does, just on our conversations that I had with Doug Carlson, the Housing Authority there.
I personally would be very interested.
How old we can certainly research that.
Exploring that.
Do we know how old it is?
But it's 70, was it 70?
When it was built.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's probably mid-70s.
I'm guessing by the mansard roofs that it's around that age.
One of the issues with it, and talking about where we go from here, continuous steps. One is, I think we need to have a broader conversation with the Housing Corporation, the
the Utah Housing Corporation, and the basis on which these projects are approved. And one of the things, or one of the tenets of trying to do this type of housing is, again, you don't want to put all the very low income housing in one area. You like to disperse it throughout the community. And just merely looking at that graphic that we have here showing the projects, where they are in Provo, and then knowing right there in South Franklin is 372 of these, fully 25% of what's in the entire county. Now, we need to have a broader conversation with the state and maybe the state legislature, certainly the Utah Housing Corporation. And that's why it was important to, Brian handed out this, the scoring process, this document here that we sent around, to looking at these projects and seeing if there's a way where in some communities they have very little of this, but yet they have needs in their community for this type of housing, that we can broaden it and have it have the same, find out what the need for that type of housing is in the county, and disperse it out on a much more demographically based proportionate share, so that it is diffused, because so all of the county is sharing the burden of all of our needs that housing drives, with public services, mentoring among individuals in neighborhoods, and things like that. And so that's one of the continuing things that we need to do. And I can see that being conversations with state legislators, with the governor's office, with this board and committee, to make sure this is done in a very smart and appropriate way, especially as we get more transit rich in our community down here with Front Runner and other things that we're working at, dispersing that. So that is our proposal here. Again, this specific proposal is one that in our mind going into it is clearly and fully intentionally, it is by its very nature somewhat temporary. What we want to do, we know the GIVE project is here, and it has tax credit. We have another project here that doesn't have tax credits, Carson Corners. And so with the proposal that we have, you would still allow higher density projects that are appropriate around transit centers could come in, but we would protect these traditional neighborhoods. In the downtown, some of these types of projects, we know of other projects that are, as they're talking to us, they're not tax credit projects, they're market projects coming in. So that's our proposal with the map. We also do want to talk about, and it really relates to this graphic you see here, but another possible idea, which deals with a proposed text amendment and kind of the aggregating of low-income projects all together in one area. And so what we have here is an ordinance, and let me read it along with you and explain as we go. It says, for each multiple family dwelling project, and that's 4 or 5 unit projects, and they can get tax credits, or apartment dwelling project, and those are greater than 5, located in any zone except the high-density residential zone. The reason we put in the high-density residential zone is if this becomes pending legislation is there, it could impact NeighborWorks and their project. And so that's kind of predicated on that thinness that the council exhibited. It says, no individual project shall have more than 20% of its units as qualifying for housing credits pursuant to the Federal Housing Credit Program as administered by the Utah Housing Corporation. So what this is saying is, okay, in the downtown or in the TOD zone, you can still do high-density projects, and you can still have some component of it being low mod income, but not 100%. We want to diffuse it out into more, and so you can't have more than 20% of the units in any one project qualifying in that area. And that would also, that type of language, give us some time to sit down with the Utah Housing Corporation and others and really come up, I think, with a more regional discussion and fix. We mentioned to you the Dr. Woods from the U's report about low-income housing in Utah County. And did you get that? Did that not come to you? Okay, I apologize. We'll get to Matt today a link with that. That's one of the recommendations from that report, is that we look at moderate income housing and low income housing. And this is housing for us, for people in our community who need it because of their financial situation. And again, when in any community, when you have a median income, you're always going to have people on the high side of it, people on the low side of it, but making sure people are on the low side of that median income can have affordable housing, which is not more than 30% of their income coming in. That Dr. Wood's recommendation is that we need to approach this on a more regional basis to make sure, for all of these reasons, that it's diffused out. And yes, Bill.
What you just said is a strongly stated goal of Vision 2030, to diffuse this to the county and work with other cities and other government agencies to try to help make that happen.
I wonder if there's any, we have any legal exposure as a consequence of this. And the other question is whether by limiting it to 20%, we effectively say this is not something that's going to be feasible to developers.
Let me address the second one first. By limiting it to 20%, would we effectively say it's not going to happen? I think probably yes. Now to your first question, do we have any legal exposure? That is a really good question. I don't feel comfortable giving a definitive answer to you, saying, if definitively I thought the answer were no, I wouldn't even be proposing it. But to definitively say or give you a high degree of confidence that I think we face no legal exposure on that one, I can't do that for you today. And let me give you a couple, we'll give you an analogy to it as why. Because the tax credits deal with, it's not a housing type or a land use regulation per se, regulating how land is used. What it's purporting to do is regulate how property or land is financed. And just as it's, unless we are giving money, like in a down payment assistance program, where we say, okay, we'll give you money based on meeting a certain criteria to pay your down payment so you can get into a home because we want to make housing more affordable. And in exchange for doing that, you sign a deed restriction requiring owner occupancy or something like that. I think that's well settled and we can do that. Government just coming in and saying, okay, in the city of Provo now, all new development that comes in has to be owner occupied, or 75% of it has to be owner occupied. We can't do that because now we're trying to directly regulate occupancy, ownership, excuse me, ownership, and not an underlying land use regulation in and of itself. And so, admittedly, by doing this, is there a good faith basis upon which to try and do something like this to accomplish goals? I think, yes, there are. Would it eventually be found to be outside of Provo City's ability to regulate, or that the federal government had preempted the area on the financing because they have instituted a very specific program doing this? Yes, I do think there is a possibility that that certainly could happen.
So this would be something you'd study further. We'd likely have another conversation before it goes to the council meeting agenda, both the text amendment and the map.
For certainly for this, for the map amendment, I would feel comfortable with that. Going forward, we already have it noticed on today's study session agenda. So therefore, I think under the city's pending legislation ordinance, we could fairly say the map amendment is pending legislation.
On the 16th.
On today.
Today.
Right now, because it is on a published agenda, council agenda.
Yes, it is. That's why I asked the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's
You asked a good question. I misunderstood.
I probably misasked it. It is something that could be done today. That's the thing.
It is done today. It is. It is already done. I think it is pending legislation.
I think the confusion was, I think your previous question implied that we were actually taking action today, and what Mr. McGinn is referring to is no action is being taken today, but the mere fact that it appears on the agenda signals an intent to take action that triggers the pending legislation.
It is something that we could. It is on the agenda for the council meeting.
No, it's on the agenda. The discussion is on the agenda right now for this meeting, which
So
triggers
on the
pending legislation.
16.
But it would be a future meeting before
6 months is out.
Now, what I would, and Brian explained it much better, and I apologize for the confusion. So let me restate it and try and be a little clearer. I'm sorry. Because the map amendment appeared on the council agenda today, and we are having that discussion.
The work session agenda.
The work session agenda. Yes, the work session agenda. We're having that discussion. I think the map amendment that we showed you here is pending legislation. It meets that criteria in our ordinance as pending legislation. That pending legislation ordinance now gives us 6 months in which to either make it permanent or modify it in some way. What effectively happens is if a developer comes in and said, hey, I want to make it, press the run button, I want to make an application for a project that was right here, we would say, okay, you are technically still in the TOD zone because that zoning is still on the ground. It formally and officially hasn't been made. You can start the paperwork process and go forward, but since we have pending legislation to the RC zone, you need to be aware that the RC zone may come in place within the next 6 months, and your project will be approved or denied depending on whether you meet that zoning in the future. Now, if you want to wait for the 6 months to see what happens, great. If you want to go forward now, then you better comply with what is the most restrictive of the TOD zone or the RC zone, which in this case will be the RC zone. And so if they came in to build a single-family home on one lot, we would give an approval for that because it would comply with all the requirements of the RC zone. Same thing with NeighborWorks. NeighborWorks would come in, and if they wanted to come forward with the project today, or I mean an application tomorrow, we would say you can go forward with your application, but you will have to go forward with your application with the most restrictive of either the TOD zone, because that's what the zoning currently is, or the high-density residential zone to which it might be done. Now, in most cases, the high-density residential is actually a little more liberal than what the TOD zone is. And so they would, if they came in with a TOD project, they would certainly meet that requirement and go forward. Now, that's assuming that the council, and I believe it was a 4-3 vote on the selling of the property to NeighborWorks, they have not made an application. So NeighborWorks has no vested right. Any pending legislation or any actual changes to the code or to the zoning map would affect them. So if the city were to say, no, go ahead, go back and do a new zone map, show this area as RC, that would effectively stop NeighborWorks' project from going forward during the 6 months.
Legally, there could be problems because we've just sold the property with the intent that they could go forward with the project, right?
I think from a pure land use standpoint, we could put pending legislation on them and do that. perhaps from a political standpoint or a moral standpoint, they'd come in and say, good heavens, what are you doing? You know, you knew all of this at the time you voted, council, and you voted as a whole to sell us the property. We bought it in good faith, thinking we could go forward.
How is the high density more restrictive than the TOD?
No, I believe the TOD is
the other way around.
Yes.
Okay, so in what way?
TOD, it has more design standards with it. The TOD has some transitional standards that I think are a little bit different than our standard transition standards. Excuse me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think they're fairly close now. That the high density residential probably is stricter on the ultimate number of units that can go in there. You could get more on the TOD, but their proposal that they've given is well within the TOD and the high density residential. Anyways, and then the other reason for, frankly, doing this is we looked at the zone map. And that's a really good question, you know. So why not just leave a TOD or something like that? I assume that's the question was, is that we were looking at originally this whole area through here like this was CM, or heavy commercial. And so as we're looking back to an appropriate zone to put it in, we thought it was not knowing what the future would hold, but it would be odd and could, though I don't think they would be successful, claims that this is somehow spot zoning. And those who know me well know I hate that term. But if we left it ITOD here and then broke it up, it just seemed to make more sense. This is a higher density residential project. So that's ultimately how we came up with that determination, and realizing our intent was, let's really work now and increase our time frame with the Franklin neighborhood and the Franklin South just to figure this out, hopefully within this 6-month period of time.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Van Buren.
So, okay, how did you come to the fact that you think that TOD on that parcel is more spot zoning than an HDR?
Well, an HDR makes a good transition when you have a commercial, heavy commercial area into a residential area. So you have residential over here to the north, having higher density residential there does make a good transition as a normal transition, would be a normal type of a transition zone that we would do in that. Could we have left TOD over here? Yeah, we probably could have. Can I hear some people I know in the community saying, oh, geez, that's spot zoning now, because clearly this is just a ruse, because you're breaking up this one zone and all of that. And frankly, you know, we had this debate a lot internally over in community development. We had to come up with something, and at the end of the day, I said I didn't want to hear that argument. So let's put high density residential there.
Thank you.
Oh, Bill, did you have something?
Just a point of clarification for your information. Contract to sell the property to NeighborWorks has been signed by both sides. NeighborWorks has deposited their earnest money, but the contract gives them until July of 2015 to close. They are just now beginning their design process. They're meeting with the Franklin Planning Group, neighborhood planning group, to start to do that planning process they described to you and committed to you when they came before you on that sale of the property.
Thank you. We'll look forward then to the item that will be on the agenda on the 16th, and then some further conversation about the text amendment.
Now, with the map amendment, I think now that it is pending legislation, there is not a need to go to a council meeting on the 16th because it is pending. And the normal process in pending or in legislation is we would take a rezone request, have a planning commission hearing, they make a recommendation, we hold public hearings with planning commission, they make a recommendation that comes back to the council. What we are hoping that we could do is have this as pending legislation, work with the neighborhood in their planning process, and get that map amendment or any map amendments in their neighborhoods done to the planning commission and done and back to you within the 6-month period of time.
Does that take form of formal action on our part at this meeting?
And so now that it is pending legislation, I don't think any action that the council needs to do further. We would just take it, work with the neighborhood and that group and the planning commission. And if at a point we determine that we can't make it within the 6 months period of time, and then zoning all goes away and we revert back to the TOD zone all the way through there, in this whole area here, then we would, at that point, before the 6 months has expired, work with council staff to get back to the planning or to the council for some sort of temporary zoning regulation.
Let me just invite anyone to express concern or hesitation.
Just the opposite. I'd like to express appreciation for this thinking. I know that this will be very valuable to the neighborhood and something that they were very much hoping for, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you. One of the things in hindsight, as we have talked about it with the TOD, maybe we should have started smaller to begin with and seen how development went and then expanded further.
This just occurs to me, I hadn't even thought about this before, but do you think it helps the pending legislation argument if the council makes a motion today to at least continue this item rather than it just being a presentation on your part with no action by them?
You know, I hadn't thought about that, but I think a motion by the council in a vote instructing community development to take this, take this and work with the neighborhood on this proposal and take it to planning commission and bring it back before the 6 months has expired would be helpful.
I think that does a better job of signaling that it's actually the council's intent that it be pending legislation instead of just community development's intent.
I think that's
I would
a
like
great
to make that
suggestion.
motion.
Fine. Matt, you have that so that you can give that to Louise. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dennis. Ms. Santiago, second. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Mr. Sewell excused.
And we will continue working on the text amendment, trying to refine that. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about next steps, if we just have a couple of moments.
Yes, we're intruding on the final item.
Oh, okay, then I won't.
Is that something you could share with us through Matt?
Yes.
Thank you. We can do that. Thank you. We've arranged to have the meal brought here to this room so as to turn the remainder of our time, 15 minutes, to Mr. Norman.
Very important.
You have 15 minutes. This isn't just my item. I was actually going to turn the item over to Jason and Stephen and okay. I'm sure that you've all been waiting for with bated breath, right?
Well, at least with some breath.
Jason, come on up. I know that a couple of weeks ago, the mayor asked me to extend an invitation to Stephen Hales and Sherry Hall Everett and Jason Bates, who's our vexillologist.
Resident
vexillologist.
My shirt is
what's that?
It's pending, my identification shirt.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I'll look for that when you. Anyway, so when we had spoken with him today, I think the best idea was apparently there was 3 different ideas that came out of this group. I know that Stephen had sent me an email message with a couple designs on there, as did Sherry, and Jason had his own ideas, and quite frankly, we as an administration have our own ideas too. And so I think what we'll do, Stephen, are you comfortable sharing with what you had come up with? Or what format do you envision this?
I can only talk about it. I don't have anything visually to
Okay.
show, but I think I would be happy to talk about
Okay.
it. Maybe we can just take like 2 minutes each or something.
Okay, that's great. You want to start, and then I'll go, and then Stephen, is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, my hope is seeing as how
Are you going to show us something?
Oh, you know, I've got, I don't know which computer is in charge here, but I've got.
I only asked because we can
Lights,
turn up the
yeah.
lights if you want.
But we do need a new city flag pretty badly. Ours has been outdated, I think, for a long time. It's been in violation of some pretty key flag design principles that I think we can do a lot better with. I hope that works. But what I was hoping that we would be able to do is come up with a design for. Oh yeah, that looks like my. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Now there are several folders in there, but what the flags that I've got pictured are yeah. There we go. And we've got some designs here that I've been working on that I'm pretty fond of, naturally. But there's a couple of design principles of flag design that I think we ought to keep in mind when we're hopefully coming up with a new flag for the city. The use of 2 or 3 colors maximum, no writing, strong, meaningful symbolism.
Did you say no writing?
No writing, yeah, no writing, no seals. And we should, if at all possible, avoid the use of logos along with the writing. So what my hope is that one day we can have a flag for the city of Provo that can be as strongly identifiable with the city as, say, Chicago always comes to mind. The people of Chicago are intensely proud of their flag, and you can put that image on things, and you can display and show Chicago pride, or St. Louis, or on a state level, flags like Colorado that are very distinctive and can be a design that we can be proud of. And so I've got some designs here that I'm fond of, and I think it's very important that we try our best to come up with a city flag design that obeys kind of the rules and the principles of good flag design. And there's a couple more you can scroll through if you'd like. The variations on kind of a similar theme. Stars here, the color blue for the river, 3 stars for people, technology, and quality of life. And there's a couple designs. If you go to number 8 for me, or 8B, please. This one? Yeah. We've got here the river, the lake with the blue, the 3 stars there for people, technology, quality of life, and the crossroads cross motifs there representing the unity that we should all be striving for as people here in Provo. And the middle star has 12 points, the 2 other stars have 11, and that's 34. And at my count, that's how many neighborhoods we have in Provo. So I had that in mind when I put 34 points on the stars there to represent the various constituent parts of our city. And does anybody have any questions for me as a, another variation kind of on that same theme, just the one 34 pointed sunburst.
34 for the number of neighborhoods.
Yeah, and
neighborhoods.
What do we do as we gain neighborhoods?
What do we do if we added Puerto Rico?
Yeah,
I thought about that several times.
Then we have a fun discussion about the addition of the neighborhood.
Understood.
Yeah, and they feel a part of things as they get their own radiant sun pointers.
So the idea is that as residents see these flags over years, they remember and recognize that that represents a river and the neighborhoods. And
yeah.
I mean, obviously, you look at that and you don't know that without someone telling you, but over time, you would know that.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah, and I always go back to Chicago in particular when I think about good city flag designs, because there are 6 pointed stars, 4 of them in the middle, and each star represents something, and each point on each star represents something very specific. And it becomes a way that the people that are from Chicago and that are proud to be from Chicago can show that by incorporating their flag in T-shirts or, their flag.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys have anything else for me, I'll just be right here close by.
Thank you.
After we had received some of the feedback from Jason and from Sherry and from Stephen, we kind of put pencil to paper and tried finding a compromising position. We really did. So we tried, because I think that Sherry in particular articulated her desire to stay consistent with the current logo that we have as a city. And so I looked at that, and we had made some modifications of some of the ones that we had posted on the internet that we had the public provide input for.
Corey, we were all laughing at you because there's a difference between a compromise position and a compromising position.
Potato, potato these days.
Down, by the way.
What's that?
Best quote of the day.
Okay. So these are just some of the two designs that we had come up with that, again, takes the current logo, which we have, and modified it enough to where you can say, all right, it does have elements of the logo that people seem to resonate with, but at the same time has some things in there that distance itself far enough to where when this current council leaves and the current administration takes off, that we have something that we can say that residents can be proud of. And as Jason articulated, it doesn't have any of the text in there, and I think abides by all the principles that a good flag, according to the vexillology, what's the association, whatever it is, whatever the organization is. So those are for your consumption, Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds
They
to me
do
like
have
we
names.
it. My intention was to come with the recommendations from our group, but it sounds like we have three completely different ideas. Sherry Hall Everett and I felt like the best solution would be to have a flag with the circle in the middle that has the logo. So it wouldn't say Provo, but it would still have the symbol. Every citizen who looks at that would know exactly what it was from the very beginning without having a long education process. It doesn't meet some of the classic flag requirements, but then again, flags were developed, 14th century, 15th century to identify armies on a battlefield. And so we no longer, hopefully, need that. Something that extends the city's identity, I felt like, would be best. So maybe what I'd recommend is that we go back again and talk, come up with maybe some options, and then present them to the city council once again. Would that work? Because some of these are the first time I'm seeing these.
These were, I think these were part of the ones, the 40 that we posted on the internet when I sent, and one of the reasons that I feel, and this is just me personally, and again, this is a council decision, but when we've asked the public to get engaged and provide us with options, and then to come up with an option that's so far away from maybe what they had suggested, that was one of the reasons we had come up with this, because this takes a couple of those suggestions and marries them, and hence the, don't quote me on this, hence the love child of two separate flags. Don't quote me. No, I said don't quote me on that. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that, but it's,
So
again,
I make a motion that we continue this item at your work session.
Second. The motion has been made, seconded. Thank you, Mr. Sewell for the second, Mr. Hales for the motion. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously.
Oh, well, Steve, what do you think about that? That seems to be pretty much the square version of the round,
I think there's some potential, certainly, in it. I think it will still be confusing for people what that is. And typically in the logo, you don't encourage people to take parts of it and pull them out of the symbol and start doing things uniquely from the logo with.
and that is true. We've really frowned on people altering the logo really at all.
This is, I missed the first part of this conversation, but this whole flag thing is amazing, isn't it? How hard it is to
I like the idea of having something timeless too, though, that we're not, once this logo has been used, and like you said, you get down the road and it's a fresh council, fresh mayor, and they're like, well, that was the old logo. We want to kind of move away from that. If you have something that's more timeless, that actually
Right, and I think
has the meaning behind it, I like that.
And I think that is the idea. Steve, I'm trying to find an email message because I know you sent me some of those images, and I'm having a hard time pulling them up here. So, but
About it next time.
Right.
In the meantime, I invite a motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you, Mr. Leonard. In a second.
Second.
Gary. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously.